says I'm dreaming. Mothman says I'm dreaming. Mothman says I'm dreaming. Says I'm dreaming. Mothman says I'm dreaming. Mothman says I'm dreaming.
Oh yes, this is Think or Be Eaten, and I think I know what we're going to do in this interview, but I'm never sure. And my guest, with whom you're all familiar, Andy Colvin, never lacks for surprises. We wanted to talk originally. The genesis of this particular show was the bizarre month of November, and we might even get to that. But I also know that the mad scientist up in Washington is up to something else, and I say that lovingly. And it also struck me, it's funny. You cannot get further in the contiguous 48 states. I could not have a guest on that's further away from me than you. I being in the extreme southeast part of this country, and you being up in the extreme far northwest, and a place where I actually have been thinking about settling down. Isn't that scary? But anyway, welcome to the show, Andy. And one thing I did want to ask you, I always have I don't have a really good sense about the way weather is in Seattle. I figure no matter what happens, you're kind of near the Puget Sound and the Pacific, and weather's kind of moderate. But there's been some really bad stories about what's going on out there, at least north of California on the coast. And I mean, you're actually having a serious winter, aren't you? And it hasn't even really begun yet.
Yeah, we went from really nice weather, more or less, to this, all just one day. I mean, I can almost pinpoint the day.
Has it snowed on you at all?
No.
All right. Because Portland got like 6 to 8 inches, I think, 2 days ago or something. I'm like, what? And but I mean, it's been pretty messy out there. But you've been down in the teens, and isn't that bizarre?
Yeah, well, they probably turned on the HARP
there you go.
radar thing up there in Alaska and shifted the weather around or something.
All right. Well,
but it was another super, super wet November. I know they had the most snow ever up in Vancouver at the, what's that, ski place, that everyone goes to, Black something.
Oh, you were asking the right guy, yeah. By the way,
where they're having the Olympics.
What I've always wanted to ask you, and I will now, I'm going to guess that this is the way it is. But when I watched, I got the box set of Millennium, with good old Lance, and they shoot a lot up in the Northwest. But I'm guessing that what I'm seeing is probably more Canada than Seattle. Is that right?
Yeah. They shot that, and they shot the X-Files in Vancouver mostly. But they did come down here and shoot a few things for it, and of course it's supposed to have taken place in Seattle.
Yeah, right, but they always shoot Vancouver of Seattle.
Well, I'm glad you turned me on to that series, because I hadn't heard of it until you did a series on it, or a couple of shows on it, and I watched every episode, and it really did have a lot of our typical themes. Here's my phone again.
Are you kidding me? I mean...
Yeah, we gotta have it ring just about once a show, don't we?
Yeah, but this is almost like nobody's going to believe that this is real, that you didn't do this on cue.
No, that was Bruce Bickford calling. The ever remarkable Bruce Bickford, he's got a book deal going for his series on pirates. He's doing a book on pirates.
Really?
Yeah, and one of the things he came up with recently, he's really into weaponry. He does these animations and sculpture, claymation things that have a lot of violence and horrible things happening. But one of the weapons he showed me recently was a Garuda sword, and I guess one of the other names for the Garuda was a bonus pati, with a bone name, or the bone prefix, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit in the show.
I wonder if he's done anything on Captain Kidd, because Captain Kidd hung around in my neighborhood.
Yes, he's interested in Captain Kidd.
Yeah.
He knows we've talked about that, and there's a lot there. There's a lot going on with the different pirate stories. I mean, that's the history of the world, really.
It is. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, because seagoing commerce was the first thing that went on. And hence the pirates, whether they were put out there by the corporation to make them pay protection or otherwise. I mean, yeah, that you're absolutely right. Actually, and Captain Kidd's the reason why there were no more cypress forests in my neck of the woods, which would be just a little bit north of Newark and New York Bay. The Hackensack and the Passaic rivers flowed together and then went out into Newark Bay. And Kidd used to go up there to hide amongst the cypress trees. They couldn't see him. So the Brits came in. You gotta love the Brits. I mean, the Nazis got nothing on the Brits, man. So the Brits went in and just destroyed all the cypress trees. So now we have a town called Secaucus there where there's nothing that grows anymore. So.
Yeah, you can't underestimate the Brits. I mean, they're the ones, more than anyone, probably, who controlled Egypt and what all may have happened there.
Oh, baby.
I guess aside from the Romans,
and I won't get into this.
Took over Egypt.
And I won't have to explain this to you, though, that, because, I mean, we could talk about this. I don't think it'll be hard for you to hear this. But, I mean, myself and a small circle of friends have realized, even through their own writings, that really what happened was that the British Empire was the second coming of the Holy Roman Empire.
Exactly.
There you go. Okay. And now we're into phase 3. So, at any rate. All right. What we were going to do was talk, or at least look back at November. Now, you're going to do what you're going to do, and I respect that. So I've got my seatbelts fastened here, and wherever we go, we go. But, I mean, I will say, whether you want to do a preface to this or not, that this November was extremely, extremely bizarre.
Well, yeah. I mean, but it's always one of the busy months, along with June and April.
But are you going for that 11 number thing?
I don't have a whole lot to add to it. No, the 11/11 thing. But that is the month, of course, when we have our 11/11 High Holy Day of Masonry. It's the day that they ended World War II on the 11th hour, 11th minute.
But I mean, I had gone over this a little bit with John Bonanno and another guest. But the stuff that came rolling out, and I mean, I'm not given to tracking stuff like that. You know, it's like, okay. But this November, I'm like, they just threw it. I mean, I'll just speak for myself. I mean, they threw it in my face so much. I'm like, are you guys kidding me?
Yeah, it was really obvious, and they really. There's got to be something here having to do with Halloween too, because they really started it on Halloween, and then they ran it right on full throttle through the 11th. Actually, through the 14th, through the end of that week, and then there was a lull of basically nothing for the third week, and then they started again to finish up the month with a bunch of stuff, and then we had a little gap of another week, and then they started up again this week, the second week of December, with a bunch of stuff, and it is, you know, as we've said, once you start looking for the pattern, you see it. You see, you know, the subtleties of it, I guess we can argue about, but they're definitely doing a patterning mix that's recognizable.
All right, one of the things is that I've always considered coast to coast. I mean, it's interesting at times. But there's no doubt in my mind that is definitely handled by somebody or something in the government. And one of the things I cracked up about was that a couple of weeks ago, Art Bell came on to sit in, I guess, for pundit or whatever, or pundit. And like in like 20 minutes, and Bell's not been on that long, he came in and just shtook it to all what we're supposed to believe. That there's man-made global warming, that it's good that we go into Afghanistan, and all this stuff. And I'm like, my God, man, like you just come on, and in 20 minutes, you go ahead and just sell all the stuff that the government wants sold. And then Norrie came on once, and he said, I mean, he was crying about, well, everybody thinks as I worked in naval intelligence that I'm a spy. And I'm like, no, George, they don't think you're a spy. Well, I mean, it's like, George, no, George, we don't think you're a spy. We think you are a cocksucker who is paid by the government to do what you do, because you suck, and I don't like you. And you're not a spy, but you are definitely handled, and face it.
A spy would be too much of a compliment.
Yeah, and he didn't have the brains for that shit. I'm sorry, but I mean, as you can tell, I can't stand that guy, and you don't either. I know, for obvious reasons, and neither does another mutual friend of ours. Not like him, that is. And then Pundit comes on, and then he's got one of the co-authors of that book, The Muslim Mafia, and this is like, midway through November. And they're hammering Islam and Arabs and everything else. And I'm like, holy mackerel. And so, and here we are now, and this has got to be, it couldn't get more, a tribute to George Orwell or Eric Blair, whatever you want to call him. It could not get any better than this in what he was saying about war is peace, slavery is freedom. We have an idiot president, as dumbass as Shrub Bush, who gets a Nobel Peace Prize and no one can figure out why. Openly they can't figure out why he got this. And at the time he gets it, he's sending 30,000 troops to Afghanistan. Do we have a problem with this picture?
Well, I would liken that to it's a pressure. He's being pressured, just in the same way he was pressured after the election.
Poor baby.
Between November and his inauguration, he was pressured by the Israelis, who immediately went on the attack in Gaza, and they actually, I'm not the only one who saw it that way either.
But I don't look at Israel.
This is the opposite of that. Pressuring him to not be a war maker.
Well, yeah.
Getting the prize, getting the Nobel. And then that night, there's a weird sighting of a light in the sky above Norway. And I think because people out there either might see him as the Antichrist, because of that light. There are a lot of people that think he's the Antichrist, but then there's other people that think he's the Savior. And I think that they came out with the story that was a failed Russian missile in order to, not allow people to go hog wild thinking Obama's the Savior.
Oh gosh.
Because that was a very strange light.
Yeah. But I mean, so it's like so what? I mean,
Well, it's kind of coincidental, isn't it?
Oh, it's coincidental without a doubt. But I had to laugh because Victor Thorne, whose show up is along with yours, we were just before we got ready to go. We were talking about that, and I go, well, the one thing is if the Russians take credit for it, they're lying.
Yeah.
Because they don't take credit for anything. So whatever that's about, it's about. But and this goes back to what we were saying before, which probably should have been the denouement for this interview rather than the preface. But I have to laugh because as I watch our presidents and the quality of the individual and the sagacity and the IQ and the whole 9 yards, it just keeps going downhill. I mean, we had George Shrub, who, he just disintegrated into an absolute boho. We have Obama, who's like, he's horrible without a teleprompter. I mean, he's, and then they're running Sarah Palin up a flagpole. And I'm like, are you serious? Are you absolutely serious about this? I mean, they're idiots. I can do a better job than that. And I don't need a teleprompter. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, it's almost as if the handlers are laughing and saying, what other dumbhead can we throw out here that people can talk about being really together? And then you get a whole, millions of people that believe that. I mean, if I rap Sarah Palin, everybody thinks I'm a Democrat. I'm not. Obama sucks. They all suck. But they're worse at it. Ever since Billy Clinton left, there's not anybody in there who can talk. They're just idiots.
Well, they seem to vacillate between, candidates who are appeal to the American women and candidates who appeal to the oil guys who are somewhat feminine in themselves. I mean, I haven't talked about this at all.
No,
you
haven't. I was surprised.
But I have friends who, from college basically, just because I went to Texas, friends who were in the oil business or some who were somewhat close to the Bushes. And it's just something I've noticed that there's a lot of cowboys, guys who are in the oil business who outwardly appear to be cowboys, but I'm pretty sure secretly in the closet homosexuals, and it's similar to a lot of these Republican politicians we have who get up there and rail against homosexuality, and then they get caught in a bathroom somewhere.
Yeah, with ladies' underwear on.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But I mean, it continues to be a case of the emperor's new clothes, where they can take someone like Sarah Palin and start talking about her in terms of she was Golda Meir or something like that, or, George Washington. And I'm like, she's an idiot. She's like a character from the movie Fargo.
But in today's social networking world, she appeals to the average American woman, I would think.
I think it's the other way around. I think it's,
Or male.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Oh, yeah, because every guy's got a fantasy about bending her over a desk and driving her home, if you know what I mean.
Oh.
Well, it's the truth. I mean, what else is she? I mean, she was on Saturday Night Live. It's why do you denigrate yourself by being on these shows? You're supposed to be above it all, somewhat, quote, presidential. Same thing with Obama. They're getting to become more and more, rock stars, and I hate to use that term because they're not even that good. They can't even freaking read music, probably, but you know what I mean? It's you just, I mean, this is what we're down to.
You've got me blushing over here.
Oh, do I really?
Oh. No, not because I thought of that. Well, I don't know, but our show has gotten racy all of a sudden.
Well, yeah, because I mean, what are we really talking about? The only distance that idiot can get is because she's got a pair of boobs. That's it. That's all she's got going for her. And I mean, you know, if brains were in her breast, she'd be like Einstein, but she's not. She's an idiot. And then, you know, the dress with the pom-poms and the cheerleader outfit, and then they go on Saturday Night Live, you know, and bust William Shatner's chops. I mean, it's.
Were they busting William Shatner?
Yeah, I somebody sent me a link. I saw the video and I'm like, I'm not watching this, but apparently, because Shatner makes fun of her vapidness for good reason, she came on and did some shtick. But here we got someone who's supposed to be a presidential candidate doing shtick. You know? And Obama popping up, on Letterman and stuff or whatever. It's like, you know, that is so pedestrian and callow. I mean, I don't want somebody to be like above it all in that sense, but it's like, you know, you don't go down into the sewer and play with the rats. You may be one of them, but you don't do that. But I mean, that's what we're doing now. We've got like, I don't know. Jeez. It's like Inside Edition and TMZ are like the real news agencies now, and everything else is just baloney. It's all become like this kind of like video game popularity contest. And I mean, I know they don't do anything anyway, but I mean, to me, what this says is we're gonna let these people behave like this, and the American people are going to accept it, and they do. So the Republicans think that she's the greatest thing since like sliced bread, and I'm like, are you serious?
Well, each time they pull off a 911 and do shock and awe and bring in a George W. Bush, you know, it just that really changed things because before that, you know, you had at least Clinton, you know, could put some sentences together.
Yeah, he could. Yeah, absolutely.
And everybody before him was reasonably intelligent. Maybe Gerald Ford. Well, Gerald Ford has a strange history too. I mean, involving mind control and stuff. So he may not have been as dumb as he seemed. But yeah, I mean, it's just since 911 things have really gone downhill. And Jesse Ventura, I just have to mention he's got a new show called Conspiracy Theory.
Right.
He just did a thing on 911. And he kind of got sidetracked on the whole black boxes issue. What happened to the black boxes?
Yeah, well, I don't think he got sidetracked. I think he sidetracked America, and he's no good either. But anyway.
Yeah. He definitely, because you can see that if he wanted to, he could really get himself into some trouble.
Sure. And
if he wanted to talk about, you know, some of the other aspects of that case, he could get people interested in it.
Yeah.
But he had to, you know, sort of get sidetracked, I think, to save his own, keep himself alive. Because it's not something you still can't really tell the truth about 911. You really can't. It's still dangerous.
No, of course not. And he's not going to do the right thing. I mean, you know, he's like Ron Paul and these other characters who like give people this hope that there's somebody out there shooting straight in politics, and they're not. They're not. They do a little something that gets people around them. But they're still the same. They're cut from the same bolt of cloth as the rest of them, and especially Ron Paul. You know, he makes some. You know, it's ridiculous. But anyway.
One of the interesting things he mentioned in the show, though, I liked, was that you can paint thermite on, super thermite. You could paint it on with paint. So they could have dumped it into the paint cans of guys who were, because I know they did some asbestos covering. Because they sprayed all the concrete or all the metal in the World Trade Center when it was originally built was sprayed with asbestos stuff, and in order to cover that, to seal that, they would have had to paint over that not too long before the fire or the attack. And because if you'll recall, Silverstein was in trouble with the Port Authority about that asbestos. And they had come to some agreement that he was going to have to pay X millions of dollars to have it remediated. Now, when they did that remediation, I'll bet you that somebody dumped thermite in the paint. And that whole place was covered with it. And no one would ever know. That could be how they did it. Although you and I know that there were, squibs going off.
Yeah.
So they were definitely setting off charges because you can see them in the videos. But maybe they also painted a lot of stuff with this thermite.
Well,
unknowingly.
what's strange is that the fact that Silverstein would buy this thing so short before the time it all went down. So, even that it stinks to high heaven. That was still the hard-on, the dual hard-ons of the Rockefellers in that town.
And those two towers, of course, form the number 11.
Yeah. No. So, well, going back to this whole thing about November and such, two of the things that struck me, and these are just, I went through this, I don't want to bore anybody who had heard me, go off with this litany with past guests. But, they did a lot of stuff to really, and this goes back to this whole bit about what Coast to Coast was doing, having these authors on for the, that book, The Muslim Mafia, or whatever it was. And, two of the things that happened in that month also, which I was like, I can't believe this is happening. And I emailed you on one of them, was when, John Muhammad was executed in Virginia at 9:11 p.m. I'm like, give me a break. But it gets better. When Oprah announced that she's leaving her daytime TV show, do you know what her end date was? Right. September 2011. 9/11. I don't know. I just think it's really rich. But, that's not even part of what was going on. But what I noticed was a definite whipping up of the masses to once again hate Arabs and Muslims. And the other thing, going back to what you were saying about what Ventura could have done since he had the bully pulpit, was now we're going to have this trial in New York of three supposed masterminds or principals in 9/11, and why are they bringing it to New York? Now, let me just say this. There's been talk about having another 9/11 commission, which is a joke because they'll bring out, a different bunch of idiots. What's-his-face won't be the Tom Keene. But they'll bring out another bunch of idiots, and they'll come to the same conclusion, and they say, oh, you see, it really was true. So what I think they're doing with these three characters, who are probably Manchurian candidates for the time that they had those guys down in Gitmo or whatever, they're going to have a 9/11 commission by trial, and these characters are going to say that they were involved with it, that they planned it, and everybody's going to go, see that? You see, they really were involved in it. How can you say there weren't 19 Arabs involved? And these guys are Manchurian candidates. So they're bringing this out to do that, so they don't have to have another 9/11 commission and try to sell the story that everything went the way the government said so, which is a joke. But, maybe it's just me. Okay.
Yeah, I like that. I don't know. I can't remember I guess it was Zymphora, Xymphora, that blog. He was saying that the Cheney part of it, where Dick was supposedly running everything from a bunker,
bullshit,
was as much as we'd like to ascribe Cheney, with the responsibility for it, because I'm sure he had something to do with it. He probably wasn't in the bunker, running anything. No. It was all military,
right. He and Rumsfeld, who went out there and Rumsfeld deliberately went out and had two slips of the lip, supposedly. In that Parade magazine where he says about the Pentagon, he goes, and this missile into the building, and everyone went, oh, look at that. No, that was all planned. And then, of course, with his thing about there was a shoot down, which there wasn't, of Flight 93. So, he fell on his sword, and Cheney fell on his sword, and
well, I'll tell you what, they did find a bunch of plane debris 10 miles away or whatever it was, from the Shanksville over that lake.
Yeah.
And that may, of course, be where a lot of our actual flight passengers ended up.
No, I tell you what, all right. I know, this is not the reason why we got together, but let me say this to you. Take this for what it's worth. But when I went back and I searched microfilm in the Times and stuff, going back to the first accounts of what took place with 93, there were about 11 to 13 witnesses who watched the flight. None of them saw the plane actually impact the ground. They saw it go beyond like a tree line or a ridge. And then there was the famous plume, which means that, that was ordnance. But anyway.
Yeah.
None of them said that the plane was breached at all. It was not There was no smoke coming from the plane, nothing. It was not hit by anything. It wasn't a shoot down. No bomb went off inside. There was nothing except the plane descending slowly. So that Indian Lake Marina is very interesting because whatever was dumped there had nothing to do with the plane, but it gives the fallback position to those who are a little brighter to understand that nothing was in that Shanksville crater. I mean, that's ridiculous. So the shoot down thing then becomes where they get caught and they want to stay, and that's bullshit too. No, Indian Lake Marina, whatever was going on there was planned as well.
Ah, okay.
Because what happened was, see, people heard noise and they felt the shuddering. They run outside and there's debris falling down upon them. Now, I mean, figure it out. If you have an event, how long would it take for stuff that's like, we're not talking about bricks falling from the sky, but like foam from seats. Now this stuff falls into the lake, but there's nothing else around.
Yeah, it would have been easier to take care of the passengers some controlled controlled way.
No, I don't. Whatever those people saw, and they did see an aircraft.
Although there is still that story of the lady who said that her husband was on one of these flights. He disappeared. She went to the reunions for that flight, and no one ever showed up. Did you ever hear that story?
No. What would that tend to make you believe, though?
I don't know, that maybe at the last minute the flight numbers got changed or something. No?
I don't know.
And I don't know.
But I mean, that whole thing stinks to high heaven, and I've done shows ad nauseum just on what they told us. But here's the best one, and I'll use this as a outro. But Lisa Giuliani and Victor Thorne, when they were Wing TV, went out to Shanksville and talked to people. And so did Dominic DiMaggio, who did some really good stuff on that as well. And everybody knows that stinks. And oh, by the way, another thing that happened in November was breaking ground for a memorial in Shanksville. That's another one. So you see, all this stuff started to bring back into everyone's memory bad old Arabs. They got them prepared. And so when they were talking about whether troops are going to be sent over by Obama, it was a slam dunk. Of course they are. Because everybody's getting all whipped up again about we hate Arabs. And the reason I say Arabs, and I differentiate, because I don't think people care if they're Muslims or not. Basically what it comes down to is they don't like Arabs.
Or blacks.
Yeah. That'll work too. Or Iranians, which are Aryans. But, I don't remember when it was, but it was one of the last conversations I had with Victor and Lisa regarding this whole 9/11 thing. But one of the things that was really interesting was that there was a correspondent of CNN who was out there talking to his anchor, and the transcripts I saved. I gave all my 9/11 stuff to Andy Sr. because I'm done with it, and I wanted him to have it. But the correspondent was talking about how strange it was to have two debris fields 6 miles apart, and he was saying, "I've never seen anything like that." So Brian Cabell was the correspondent who's now gone from CNN. And so the anchor was like trying to like modify his statements, and Cabell's just saying, "I've just never seen anything like this." And so it went. Well, I think Lisa called up Cabell. She found Cabell. And she said to him, "What about that whole debris field thing?" She goes, what about that?" He goes, "Well, to me, that was the story. And then they told me, MIBs, that isn't the story. Take it for what it's worth." So the point being is that Shanksville, if people believe that Shanksville is a fake spot, which it is, they shot ordnance into that whatever that is and call that the crash site. If that's a fake site, you must have a controlled site. You don't have a shoot down. You don't have Arabs, fighting with people in the cockpit, because you can't have the plane come down just anywhere. If you got a fake site, you have to have a controlled site to take the plane down. And that would be New Baltimore, 6 miles southeast of Shanksville. And they told Brian Cabell, "You got no story." And that was the end of that. And I think that says volumes about what really happened out there. So.
Well, David McGowan did some nice stuff on 911. He was one of the first people to say the very next day he posted on his site, just a false flag, situation. But he talked about Cleveland and its importance in the whole thing, and how it appears that 2 or 3 of the planes landed there after they were.
Yeah, that whole bit about landing at John Hopkins, was it Hopkins?
Yeah, and that would have been where the passengers were taken off in the secure NASA facility there, which adjoins the airport.
Yeah. Well, even I don't know if you remember the name Key Dudney, who's got a website. I forget what it is now. But Key came out with something called Operation, I think it was it Operation Pearl? In which he posited what might have happened. And it is plausible with all that happened. But you see, the thing that people can't handle, and I understand why they can't, but it's like, it's your government, man, and they're not here to help you. And that is, you got people that were executed, straight out. They might have been told they were going to get debriefed in a hangar or something like that. And of course, people say, well, that's too hard to keep a secret. Believe me, it's easy to keep secrets. You just have to threaten people the right way. Or kill them, and they'll shut up. So, I mean, it's possible, but people cannot handle the fact that whoever the passengers were in those 4 planes were done away with summarily. And that's just the way it goes, and they forget about the Lusitania, and they forget about the Maine, and they forget about Pearl Harbor, and so they would rather hang with the 19 bad guys.
Yeah, if they're willing to kill a few thousand people in the buildings, I mean, they're willing to take out a few more.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look back at the accounts by those people who came forward about Pearl Harbor. And I've talked on the show about Rear Admiral Robert Theobald, who wrote a book in '54 and said, and documented and laid it out. And that Thomas Dewey, who was the presidential challenger for the Republican Party, was going to come out with everything about how FDR knew. This was in '44. And basically his own party and the Democrats told him, you're not going to say anything about it, because if you do, we're going to go ahead and we're going to indict you for sedition. So he shut up. So what the hell's that about? You know what I mean? See, your government kills people when they have to. Understand it. That's the nature of government. They're not here to help you. They fake like they're nurturers, but they aren't. And when they have to dispense of people to get a certain thing done, they do it. And they did it on 9/11/2001, and they're going to do it again. So, that's just the way it goes, folks. That is the way things are. And they don't want to believe it, and I can understand it because it's hideous. But that's one of the reasons why it continues to happen, is because people just want to put their head in the sand.
McGowan also did a good series on the Apollo 11, or the Apollo missions, which I listened to your interview with him. It's a good interview. One of the things that struck me in there was he was saying that they were probably funneling money from, the money that was coming in to be appropriated to this fictional flight to the moon was being siphoned off and used for other things, like the Vietnam War. And he mentions all these coincidences where Nixon, who ran on ending the war, but Kissinger, had a plan to increase the war or escalate the war. So every time they needed an escalation, or a diversion, as Nixon, would, each time Nixon had to lie and go against his campaign promises, they would have an Apollo mission. Or, when that soldier, whose name I forget, first sued, he was the first one to sue the government for being mind controlled as a Phoenix, program assassin. They immediately had an Apollo mission the next week. And then right after My Lai was exposed, they had an Apollo mission. Always time just to get us off of the idea that horrible things are happening in Vietnam.
And I talked to Victor about this in this recent interview that's up with yours. And I talked to John Bonanno about it too, because he's, age-wise, he's a cohort of mine, and he remembers what was going on when, where he was, and we all agreed. One of the things that happened with Nixon coming out with the Cambodian invasion is that it was only a week or 10 days before when they were talking about de-escalating and bringing troops out, and no sooner was that said than word got out that we went into Cambodia. And what happened was, because then there was a conscription army, which means draftees would have to go, and they didn't want to go, which is different when it's happening right now, which may change in the near future. But the thing was, it was one thing to go ahead and expand the war. It was another thing to say you were going to contract it and then expand it within a week or so, and the campuses went nuts. And that was something that the NSA or whoever the hell runs things, the president, all that crap, they had I really truly believe they had no idea they were going to get that kind of a widespread, let's call it violent reaction. And of course, then we had Kent State, and that was the end of anybody protesting ever again. That was, without a doubt, man, you talk about overkill. And that was it. That was the end of protests.
And they killed 4.
Huh?
They killed 4, which is the Masonic number that we continue to keep talking about.
No, yeah.
The ancient Mayan name for the word 4, Khan, is the same word that they use for serpent and sky.
Well,
and this Khan name is coming up more and more in my research, including the name Kent State, which is an abbreviation of Canute, I think, probably.
Well, with the shootings at Kent State, I mean, the fire was so random, I don't know, could it be controlled? Yeah, I guess, but, you shoot somebody in a parking lot, you shoot a blind person. I mean, what the hell's that about? I mean, so the whole thing was such a travesty. I can't see that, it being controlled in that sense because to me, the whole thing blew up in their faces.
Well, someone wrote a wonderful article, I think it was Joan d'Arc of Paranoia, or one of her friends, whose name I can't remember, but, that there actually was an organization going on there that the troops marched in a Masonic way before shooting. They were chanting and doing weird marching formations.
Well, I mean, who can say now? I mean, now it's over with, and I don't even know if there was any kind of.
Well, this author actually linked it to the Rockefellers very directly and said, the article was about the Rockefeller signature, whatever that is. It's a form of how you would incite protesters or miners or whoever it is you're trying to control. You let them go a little haywire, or in the case of Attica prison, the prisoners, you let the prisoners go wild, and then you crack down. And
oh, sure. I mean, that's the old Hegelian dialectic, though, too. I mean, create the problem, gauge the response, and then provide the solution. So you can take anybody where you want them to go. It's like picking a fight, basically, and it always works. But I tell you what, there's a book online. You can do a search called The Taking of America 1, 2, 3. It was written by Richard Sprague. And in it, he talks about the Power Control Group. Interesting name. And in one part of the book, he says, well, some people will say it's the Rockefeller Group. Some will say it's a CFR. And I was interested that he even would mention that. And this was written back in the 70s, as far as I can tell. And like I said, do a search on it. You can read it. Guy apparently lived up around Woodstock and apparently put out signs alongside Route 28, which I know very well, about, who killed MLK, who killed JFK, who killed RFK. And I'm just trying to find out who this guy was and more about him. But he went on with this thing about does it really matter who it is? And I'm like, yeah, fucking A, it does. But nobody will go there. But he mentions the Rockefellers, and I have to laugh in the CFR, which is Rockefeller birth. I mean, the CFR, the Trilats, that's all Rockefeller begun stuff. The Bilderbergs. I mean, these are the people who get things done. And, I think he was a little bit, I don't know. People ought to know what's going on, and it isn't happening out of D.C. I mean, you and I have talked about it, and I'll even say this, and I think, I'm not picking a fight with you, but early on when we first started doing the shows, you just didn't really want to necessarily go there. That changed, and I think rightfully so. But remember, I mean, it's tough, but that's who makes things happen in this country and have for over a century. They take their orders from from the old world as well, But those are the ones that are running the deal. So, Rockefellerian signature, you bet. You bet. So
there's I had bookmarked a spot in the Black Sun, Montauk's Nazi-Tibetan Connection by Peter Moon, where he was talking about I.G. Farben and how the early movers and shakers in that corporation were part of the CFR. I can't find it right now, but I did happen upon this emblem for the Black Sun. It's the signet of the Black Sun. It's now illegal to print this in Germany because the Black Sun is the most secret belief system of the high level Nazis. And believe it or not, it looks like it's four marks. It's four straight marks. You could call it 4 ones, but 2 of the ones cross over 2 of the other ones at an angle. So and so it looks like 2 twin towers, basically. The number 11, with 2 shorter slashes going through them at an angle, which the effect of it is, because there's a blast of light, I guess you could call it, coming from these, it looks like they're being blown up and falling over. I swear to God, I just noticed this. It's really pretty amazing. This is clearly, it's on page 155 of that book. Clearly a reference, I think, to the Twin Towers.
There are 2 things that were going on with this, and one of it I think could be accidental, and part of the other could be accidental as well. But after a while, it gets to be, I would say, interesting. The fact that the towers have been depicted in commercial enterprises, movies, video games, whatever, as being felled, really is something that, it kind of is like normal if you want to do a, like a Havoc movie or something like that. That always fit the bill. And, you and I have talked, and you've recounted, I believe it is your friend's vision of what happened to the towers, that when they put them up, we just looked at them and said, they're begging to be knocked over. That is such an obscene projection to have on what is probably one of the lowest profiles of the Manhattan skyline, which is downtown Wall Street. To put these 2 suckers up, it's like, what is that about, actually? So we saw it in Super Mario had a game where they knocked them over, and a lot of books and movies have used this whole thing about felling the towers. The other thing, though, that gets me under my skin is the appearance of 9/11. In so many movies and such, and of course, when does it stop? How many coincidences do you need till you have a conspiracy? Till the joke is on us. And like I said to you, it's okay. So John Muhammad was executed at 9/11. Oprah wants to give up her show at 9/11. And I don't know if you remember it, Andy, but I had all those images up from movies that showed 9/11. I'm sure some of them were maybe happenstance, but a lot of them weren't. And John Valentini went ahead and found more and more and more. And so what I'm looking at is the aspect of, okay, the towers, that kind of was in your basic disaster movie mentality. Just like if you remember, and I know you're younger than I, but you remember the Towering Inferno?
Yeah.
All right. That was based on 2 books, which I got, by the way, to find out how those authors treated what they thought would be the demise of the building. Because the Towering Inferno is based on 2 books. The Glass Tower and I forget what the other one is, but I got them and I read them. It's not really a lot there. Excuse me, but be that as it may, 9 and 11 come up time and time again. And Valentini posited that 9 and 11 flank what is the perfect number, which is 10. And react to this if, by all means. The 1 being in the male, the 0 being the ovum. And 9 and 11 hold a very heavy occult presence or meaning. You want to weigh in on that?
Oh yeah, well that sounds very good. I like that. The O with a slash through it, with a horizontal slash through it, is the Greek letter. I just saw this in here. Olema. it relates to the letter T in Greek. And the letter T is what you see in this 1111 Independence Avenue site. You see the letter T, depending on how you're looking at those buildings. You either see the letter T or the letter 1. And since there's two of them, you see TT or you see 11. Now, Thelema was the name of Crowley's, basically the name of his form of occultism.
Okay. Yes, right.
And so it's a Masonic thing. That particular 11 that we've talked about in those buildings is the Masonic symbol for the long sought word, the 3-syllable secret word that the Masons, that supposedly, if you utter them, will cause you to have power over everything.
All right. Now,
power over reality.
Does this refer to the legend, and I don't mean to demean the story, it could very well have been true, about the 3 artisans that wanted the word from Hiram Abiff and couldn't get it, and therefore killed him, which leads to that whole story about Osiris and such. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, and so we have some buildings at 1111 Independence Avenue that are mimicking this symbol. And then we have some other buildings there that look like 111L from the sky. Now, the long sought word, interestingly, there's different variations of it. You said that, you mentioned one was Maha Bone, which is the bone word again.
Yeah.
Referencing the Bon religion of Tibet, which apparently they came from Iran, the Bons, and they were a goddess worshipping bird woman, bird man, Anunnaki, Sumerian kind of tribe that went to Tibet. Mount Meru in Tibet is supposedly was, according to Moon, everyone came from Tibet or Mongolia first, and then they sort of spread out. And in the case of the Iranians, they came back again. In other words, they left Mongolia, went to Sumeria, started the whole Anunnaki birdman thing, then went back again, started the morphed the Mon religion, the early Mongolian religion, morphed into the Bon religion, which was female, basically. And then when the Buddhists came in, they wanted to make it patriarchal, and so there's all these tales of how they subdued the she-devil of Tibet by driving stakes into the ground, and these were always done in the form of squares. So you'd drive 4 stakes, or stupas, they actually built temples. They laid the whole area out into squares and then staked them off with 4 corners, which again relates to masonry in that is your basic George Washington's apron motif. You've got the square with the 4 columns at the corners. It actually goes back to early Tibetan Buddhism, and was also seen in those Florida mummy burials where they would take a square cloth, bury the people in water with 4 stakes at the corners. Where was I going with that?
No,
the 111 thing. So the long sought word, you mentioned Mahabone. Other ones that have been thrown out are, where's that at? Oh, Morbonzi. Same thing with, you got your Mor word, your Bon word. Interestingly, Morbonzi is very close to Moroni, which is supposedly the angel that Joseph Smith talked to, who gave him information about the tablets that he had found. The tablets have been acknowledged, supposedly, according to Moon, by the Mormons as being Washita or Moorish tablets.
All right. Can I read something to you?
Yeah.
Real short. I stray away from doing things of a certain gravity during the month of December, mainly because I don't celebrate December 25th as the birth of Christ. To me, it's the holiday season, and I suspend most of the stuff, if not all the stuff, that I would normally do of a critical nature. Only because to me, now it's a remembrance of family past, Christmases past, personages that have gone. And I like it like that. That's what I do. As I get older, I get even more melancholy. So the last 3 years, I've been especially childlike, if you will, about embracing the time between Thanksgiving and Christmas. I love it. Absolutely love it. And I don't have any religious affiliation to that. But let me read you something, because this will make your hair stand up. There was a book written prior to 2001. I believe the title of it is, and I'll look for it because I've got the excerpt that I wanted. It was called The Star That Shook the World, or something like that. It was written by a Christian preacher. It was written in the 90s. Let me read you this. The Apostle John said this heavenly relationship occurred at the time of Jesus' birth. And in 3 BCE, this exact combination of celestial factors happened just after sunset, only on one day of the year. It was on September 11th. It could not have occurred at any other time of the year. Indeed, even one day before, September 10th, the moon would have been located above the Virgin's feet with the crescent not visible. While one day farther, on September 12th, the moon had moved too far beyond the feet of the Virgin, at least 25 diameters of the moon east of her feet. Thus, only one day applies. That day was just after sunset on September 11th. Now, this guy is not necessarily into astrology. He is taking what is given in Scripture to try to best triangulate, or however you want to call it, the birth of Jesus Christ. This guy wrote this in the 90s, and he said it was September 11th.
Wow.
Now, whether or not you, Andy, or anybody out there believes in Jesus Christ, I would say if you believe in evil, you probably should believe in Jesus Christ, because it all comes under the same umbrella. Here's my point. How much more wicked could you be than to celebrate what you know to be the birth of Jesus Christ, the salvation for all mankind, than to do something dastardly on 9/11? That's all I'm going to say.
Well, Moon makes the comment in one of these books about the Mormons having the sign of the nail, having a nail on top of their big cathedral in Salt Lake City, and that is a Masonic reference to they're celebrating the crucifixion of Christ.
Are they celebrating in the sense of?
In the sense of, yeah, we got him, or
okay,
we
right,
have co-opted
right.
what Christ represents. And I tell people, when I'm in trouble in life, I've prayed to Christ. I still do it. And it's not necessarily because I believe that the literal story that there was somebody in Jerusalem in that exact year that they're saying. It's that I believe in this principle, and it is this returning Messiah figure and what it represents. Because the more you get into it, you do start to see that this is a really, really ancient tradition, and has manifested itself over and over again. There's been many Christs, I think, and even if you just look at some of the names involved, like the word Yeshua, which is one of Christ's names, comes from Tibet. It's a Yesh is the name for all things that are. Where is that? I can't remember exactly what it is. It's in here somewhere.
That's all right.
It's all that is good and powerful, or something like that, and there's other things connected to it that really do point toward Christ. That the Christ story, of these guys, he's got lots of different names, references to him. I can't think of them all right now. Well,
let me just finish this out, because if you don't mind, I kind of, for those who might be interested, I kind of left this out a little open-ended. But what I'm talking about is what comes from a book entitled The Star of Bethlehem, The Star That Astonished the World, by Ernest L. Martin. He's now passed. He wrote this in 1996. He's not a whack job. To me, the guy seems like a legitimate Christian. And again, he wrote this in 1996, and he's affixing the date of Christ's birth to September 11th. It certainly wasn't December 25th, without a doubt. And of course, that's the old crap that Constantine pulled off, in the story that you hear from sorry folks, the Romanist Church or whatever, about moving up or moving along the real date of Christ's birth to the Feast of Saturnalia so that the pagans would be more inclined to be converted. That's crap. That was a hijacking of a very obviously high spiritual moment for Christendom. And so all I'm saying is that when I read that, I was pretty much like blown away, and I tried to write his people, and I got some ridiculous response, and I'm like, yeah, dude, don't worry about it. Okay, no problem. I got this like lecture. It's like, shut up. So anyway, isn't that interesting, to say the least? And if you haven't died of a heart attack, I assume you'll be talking to me soon. So I guess the point is, and I mean, Andy, you've ever, go ahead.
Well, go ahead.
No, here's the thing that like is striking me now. It's like I ask people, and I've actually asked to suspend any kind of correspondence until like after January 1st or whatever, until I want to like just be a kid again for another couple of weeks, and then I'll get back to, the direct. But I mean, I think about people who talk about the evil. I mean, does anybody really understand how powerful and, whatever it is out there that we're up against? I mean, it somehow, I don't know, escapes them, or, I'm like, if you're up against this kind of thing, think about what your chances are of trying to win a battle down here. That's all. I mean, and it leads back to, well, okay, if there's a Satan, then guess what? There probably is a Christ. I mean, that's a backward engineering in my head. But, and I watch people talk about this, and it's almost like, I keep hearing about how humankind is going to defeat it. And I'm like, well, it hasn't ever happened. And I really would, it'd be okay with me if they could. But that's the problem, is that the flesh is corrupt also. And I mean, you go ahead and take any organization. You can think about the ones that you've been involved with, and I hear about, the 9/11 groups and people who have been in them. And it's like, as soon as you create a group, assholes get in there and they take it over. Because that's what assholes do. That's what bad people do. And I think we're confronted with that here. And I'm like, do you have any idea about what we're dealing with? That's all. So somehow I think
on the reference here, it says the word for power in Tibetan is yesh. Christian scholars will immediately recognize yesh in the word Yeshua, the Aramaic name for Jesus. Aramaic, the word Aramaic is actually named after Aramaiti, who was an Iranian earth goddess. In Tibetan, yesh also signifies Shakti, the female power pods of the rising serpent of Kundalini. In this sense, which gets to the Garuda symbology. In this sense, Jesus' original name in the language he spoke signified the power of the feminine force. There are also persistent legends of Christ visiting Tibet during his missing years in the Bible. There's all kinds of cross-references with Tibetan and Christian names. There's a Tibetan king named Thoth Rory, which, with Greek, that's Thoth is the Greek name for Tahuti, who built the pyramid. Okay. The pyramid's architect was supposedly Imhotep, which has the name Moth in it, Moth Pie. and his pyramid was the Saqqara pyramid, the one where he's supposedly buried, and that has 1.5 million mummified birds under it. So there's obviously a real, importance of the bird to the founders of Masonry, i.e., the pyramids. There's all kinds of interesting stuff in this book that this Black Sun book. But isn't I do recommend it to folks.
But I mean, across almost any century, and I just I say that so glibly, but it seems to me, and I'm kind of like, I'm not an Audubon like type person, but I would call myself like like an amateur birder. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just fascinated by birds. But I mean, the bird symbol has been with us always, and for the most part, it seems to be what I would consider a symbol of freedom, of release, and even with the phoenix, of, born again. And I don't think that's necessarily an accident or a coincidence. I mean, and you speak about it. When I first, talked to you all those years ago, I was thinking that, because that's kind of what I got without paying attention, that the whole Mothman thing was like a bad thing. And that's when you told me, no, it's really not. If anything, it's a warning that bad things are about to happen. So don't shoot at the messenger. But I mean, there's something that's embraced humankind forever that I think, associates with something very positive with our feathery friends. I mean, have you ever seen anything necessarily that was necessarily evil affixed to bird imagery?
Only in the sense that the Garuda is a quote wrathful deity.
It is.
Wrathful in the sense that he's reflecting, as you usually meet him after you die, but you can also meet him, I guess, in other situations momentarily, temporarily, where you're in another sort of dimension, I guess, at a vortex or a site or something. But you're confronted with your own darkness, basically. Because you're connecting in these situations with the collective unconscious.
But
that includes all the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. And really, it's all about awareness. Can you, in that moment, be aware enough to see it as that and let it fade away of its own accord? In other words, you don't necessarily run from it, or take it in. You just observe it. Because if you don't do that, you're in for trouble. And one of the quotes I think of is Jung's quote, "Everything unconscious returns as fate." So the more conscious you can be of your own goodness and your own evilness on a daily basis, the more in control of your own fate you will be.
I want to hit this real light because I've gone on about it, but I haven't done it with you. And I'm going to ask you a question with regard to what took place a couple of days ago. In that month of November, and I was telling you about that, like I said, the Muslim Mafia authors popped up all over the place, and doing their thing. Men who stare at goats. I got that right?
Yeah.
All right. That's about PSYOPs. That came out in November. We had the groundbreaking at Shanksville. Muhammad was killed. We had the Modern Warfare 2 made its debut. And I never really look at that stuff. When I see the commercials for it, it's like, I can't believe kids are sitting there and just doing this all day long. All right, so you kind of know where I'm going with this.
You want me to go through my calendar for that month?
Yeah, and all right, I'm going to ask you to do that. But I'm going to ask you this question now, and then I'm going to let you go through November. One, do you think, and it's more than just the month of November, that we're preparing some segment of this population for warfare, and that perhaps, like when I woke up, I guess it was Friday morning, we watched the Today Show as our alarm clock, and the Republicans were like really into like Obama's speech, and I'm like, what's that about? But of course he's decided to send 30,000 over. And this is as he's getting a Nobel Peace Prize, like we said, like, all right, what's wrong with this picture? Let me ask you, is it possible that we'll look back at this choice to send these amount of troops in at this time as being the bridge too far? Do you think that we might look back at that decision and say that's when the stakes got raised and we never came back from it?
I don't think you can say that yet. Why? Because okay. I think their goal here simply, and it's amazing that they never mention it, their only goal here is to get that pipeline built through Afghanistan from Turkmenistan down to the water. And that, if you just look it up on Wikipedia, the, what's it called? The,
Trans-Caspian?
There's an acronym for it.
There's an acronym for everything, yeah.
It escapes me for some reason. I'm sure I've written it down here somewhere. I'll probably find it soon. But there's, they've been trying to build this thing for years, and they're having a problem in southern Afghanistan with the Taliban. And that's about 1/3 of the distance, and they're projecting it for completion in 2014. So that means, they only have to work on it for a couple of years. They only have to provide troops for a couple of years to get that thing built through southern Afghanistan. And once they're done, they'll be gone. And the rest of the pipeline won't need that kind of security. And that's perfectly in line with what Obama's saying. He's saying, well, we're going to have him out of there in, 2 years by the time he's leaving office. And that would give them all the time they need to do it. But that's all it is. It's nothing more, nothing less.
Well, I think they use the oil thing as a reason to get a lot of things done. They're going to use that and religion. Because the thing is, even if you get a pipeline...
But they're not using it. What I'm saying is that they never mention this in the media.
What's that?
That's why they're doing it. So I think it, if they were using it, they'd be mentioning it.
Well, they are in certain places. Okay, I agree. Mainstream, it doesn't seem to come out like that. But I have heard that as a justification for what's going on. But my point is, okay, great, they put the pipeline in. Now you got to defend it. It's not stopping anybody from hijacking the thing away from you.
Oh, well, that's true. Yeah, you're right.
What I think is afoot is, first of all, I think it's going to come down to they're going to have a war of religions. It goes right back to 1000 AD. It's going to be Christendom versus bad old, Islam. But I think that they're trying probably, I wonder what goes on at times, Andy, like in the War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, because there's some of the stuff that comes out of there in their magazines, in their periodical. I mean, it's just like incredible. And I actually believe that they're telling our soldiers, our warriors, that we can have the last empire. And this goes back to what Mackinder was saying, back at the turn of the century, and what, Brzezinski wrote about in the Grand Chessboard, that whoever holds Eurasia has the last empire. And I'm wondering if they're not telling the soldiers we can do this, because if we don't, the bad old Russians and the Chinese will do it. We can use the oil pipeline. That's another thing. We can use religion as another. But I tell you what, there's an awful lot of information projected from 100 years ago that has forecasted there's going to be a final duke out. Hey, I mean, even think about it. I mean, what did Orwell write about? The three powers are always going at each other, although vague notions of war, So, I mean, and I would really encourage people to read a book called Lord of the World by Robert Hughes. Let me get this right. Robert Hughes Benson. I think I have that right. I'll take a look as we're talking. This guy was talking about a Third World War before there was a First World War. He wrote this like in 1909, interestingly enough, in the city of London, and talked about how the United States had to come over to Europe to stop the Mongol hordes from coming across. Here's where I'm going with this bigger picture of like, there's going to be a final show now, and it's got a lot of things going on. How they sell it to people can be in many ways. And I've heard the story, too, that if we don't get the oil, the bad old Russians or Chinese will. And so we have to be over there. And I'm not belittling what you said, not whatsoever. No, that is definitely a justification I've heard for this as well. And you're right. It's not been that much in the mainstream, but it's there just below the surface a little bit. But basically what we're looking at, I think, is just, honestly, these creatures that run the world don't want a lot of us around. And what better way can you depopulate better than swine flu than have a good old conflagration, and therefore then you can come in and promise peace to everyone, and they'll go for anything you tell us to. And remember, Andy, World War I, try to prepare people for the League of Nations, kind of didn't work. World War II, prepare everyone for the United Nations, they accepted it. Well, we're going to go one more time, and that's my take. But anyway.
There's a lot of, you're right. I agree with you. It is multi-pronged, and the religious part is important, because, let's face it, the Muslims have a foothold in the ancient history of Christianity and Masonry. There's some stuff in the Black Sun about this. He's talking about the black stone, in the Kaaba, that the Muslims in Mecca that they make their pilgrimage to, and the name of it is similar to the name. One of the names of Christ is the stone that was rejected, and he says this is not only an esoteric name for Christ, it is also a phrase which refers to the capstone that once stood over the Great Pyramid of Giza. We see this again if we consult Egyptian mythology, where Gabriel is the equivalent of Tahuti, the builder of the Great Pyramid. The idea that Tahuti, in the personage of Gabriel, gave the stone to Abraham suggests that the black stone in Mecca represents part of the original capstone of the Great Pyramid. This kind of, it's, you know, this is why they have to go after the Muslims to, you know, the hammer and tong, because they are very close to all of this, to the very foundations of our own belief system. What else does he say here? Well, he talks about a fire that destroyed the Kaaba in the 7th century. And by the principles of synchronicity, the next person to enter the courtyard after you know, when they were rebuilding it, they had decided whoever walks in next is going to be the Messiah. And it happened to be Muhammad. By the way, there's a town called Muhammad out there in Illinois where we were talking about this holy mountain that the Ishmaelites used to circle. Mm-hmm. The southern edge of this, I actually looked at the map again, and I see that there are roads in place now that actually match up quite well with the pilgrimage route that they took around this area. And they are Route 50, what is that? Route 52, no, Route 54 in Illinois, U.S. Route 52 coming over from Indiana, and on the southern edge of that pyramid, the base of the pyramid is Route 119, and that's 911 backwards. Route 119 in Illinois. And I think it may go through Muhammad. But, you know, so it's all there in our own underpinnings here in America, all this stuff. Well, it says here, I'll skip over a lot of this, but it says, he basically says that Muhammad derived his power from the Great Pyramid in the Muslim tradition. So they have a claim to masonry as well, and there's a Tibetan connection to all this in the word Islam. Is represents Isis or the feminine, and Lam is Tibetan for way or path. So Islam means the path of the feminine. And there's various ways that you can see the name of Christ representing the same thing. So there's crossover. You know, both traditions have sort of are trying to explain this power of regeneration, the power of a Messiah or leader who can continue to keep mankind from destroying himself. But it's just fascinating. It's just there's so much stuff here that it just really boggles the mind, and I feel sorry that I can't do a better job of really pulling it together for people, because it would, if you could somehow get this across to people, there might be a way to counteract this rabid militarization you're talking about. And I think you're absolutely right that what happened in November was all about getting those troops over there, and also getting us off of our own problems, which is that we were scammed again by Bush and Obama on the bank bailouts, and we are, you know, heading down. Our standard of living is going down, and it's only a matter of time that is made more obvious to us. And if they can have us involved in a conflagration overseas, it's going to help, you know, them control dissent here in America. Well, and you can see it quite clearly in the events that happened in November. Go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that, you know, this sounds a bit simplistic and trite, but that doesn't necessarily make it wrong. And that, to me, with certain little, perhaps, variations, we're running it the same script as we ran before World War I and World War II. It deals with economics. It deals with a president that's a Democrat that takes a problem from a Republican president. That would be Wilson from Taft before World War I. That would be Roosevelt from Hoover in World War II. That would be Obama from Bush now. financial crisis, not a lot of jobs, people being pissed off, wanting to hate somebody, and all of a sudden it's like, hey guys, by the way, military's hiring. You know, I just, to me, this is what's lining up to be. And we may not see that war for 10 years. That could very well be. You can time World War I from the 1909 panic. You can time World War II from the 29 stock market crash and the depths of the Depression in 32. And you figure out, you know, do we call what happened in 07 into 08 a financial collapse? To me, that's not a collapse at all. It's a very bad financial event, but not anything compared to the Depression. And I have no idea what the impact of the 1909 panic was. And by the way, that 1909 panic was what led our good Americans, the bankers, to decide that we needed the Federal Reserve to prevent us from ever having an 09 panic. So they get their Federal Reserve, right, 1913. So what do we have 16 years later? Stock market crash. You know what I mean? It's beautiful. Anyway, I will say that author I was telling you about is Robert U. Benson, who died in 1911. 1914. I'm looking around because I had fallen upon this before. He converted from Anglican to the Catholic religion. I believe he was ordained on 9/11, but I can't find that, so I can't confirm that. But I do believe I saw that, for whatever that means. But he writes about a Third World War before there was even a first. And you can read that online. Lord of the World. Go check it out and talk about how the Brits felt that the United States would factor in to saving Europe from the Asian Empire coming across.
Well, Charles Manson was right when he said this. It was a struggle for points of reality. And this, you know, the Muslims have a legitimate knowledge of and claim to the ancient traditions. They obviously came here before the English, before the Spanish, before the Europeans, and it's reflected in all the place names that we have and the various mounds that we still see, you know, here and there. And that's why that they're being so consistently attacked. They're the only ones that really, I think, could present, if given a chance, a competing ideology to whatever the Roman Empire decided to come up with. You know, when they made a big stew and filled it with paganism and whatever else they threw in there, and then it morphed into, you know, the English, the British Empire, and now us. And actually now it's more like the echelon group, which is all of the different countries in the European or in the British orbit. You know, Canada, Australia,
United
America,
States,
New Zealand, Germany, I suppose now.
All right. So did you want to run through that calendar, by the way?
Yeah. So well, on October 30th, the day before Halloween, we had the House presenting the health care bill. Now that's a big issue. That's something that the elites do not want to see happen. So what do? The next day? And it sounds like a small thing, but it had a big impact, probably. I know it did here, and maybe it did across the country. Maybe you can tell me. But a Seattle police officer was murdered in his car, and they presented it as an execution. And that's just a really rare story. You just don't hear about that very often, as far as I know. They immediately started connecting it to the Officer Terry case, which is another police officer who was killed in his car years before here in Seattle. It just so turns out that Terry was the officer in charge of investigating the Kurt Cobain suicide, and would have known that if it was murder. The shooting of the officer was near 23rd and Yesler, which is about two blocks from my old house that I just moved from. Right there where there's a Thunderbird totem. It's traditionally been the home of the Indians, where all the Indians were gathered as time went by, and we got into the 20th century. They were all more or less put there. All the Indians were made to live there. And the Indians that took over Fort Lawton in 1970, the really radical ones, lived there. So I think, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I think the reason for the placement of these shootings in this area is to sort of make that neighborhood look bad. Because I think the Masons or whoever runs Seattle have a long memory. And I'm sure they still want to get back at the Indians in that neighborhood for what they did in 1970. But earlier in the summer, about 2 blocks from there, right in front of my house, there was another very odd shooting where a kid just, for no apparent reason that anyone can figure out, went into his house, grabbed an AK-47 or something, and shot another boy in a car as he was driving away. And the body was literally right out in front of my house on the median. And in that night, they had a standoff that night where the guy was hidden, went back into his house, and the police, even though he wasn't there, they shot the house to smithereens. All night long you heard them taunting him, basically. They would put off a big flash bomb and shoot a bunch of mortars in there and say, well, that's just to remind you that we're out here. Just stuff like that. And he wasn't there. And I think they knew he wasn't there. But they just wanted to terrorize the neighborhood. Well, they did the same thing again with this most recent guy, and I'm getting ahead of myself. But we had the guy, Clemens, who recently shot 4 cops in Tacoma. But somehow he ends up in the same neighborhood on the same block where the officer was executed on Halloween. Now, how does that happen?
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think anybody knows this, but it's quite coincidental. But I'll get back to him later.
Okay.
Or do you want to talk about him at all? The Huckabee angle?
Oh, well, no. Yeah, do the Huckabee thing, sure.
He was let go. Clemens was his name. He shot 4 cops in Tacoma. He's murdered. He's finally killed near Seward Park, which is a few blocks south, which I've talked about before as being an ancient Indian sacred area. Columbia City's right there, where they have an old Masonic history. Clemens supposedly holed up in a house there on that same block. The news trucks set up in the same exact place. And they shot up that house as well, the same way. Flash bombs, shot all the windows out, went on all night long, terrorized the neighborhood. He wasn't there. And I wrote a blog about that. Let me see, do I want to mention this? Now let me read this real quick.
Go ahead, sure.
It says the suspect, Clemens, fled to Seattle, where he ended up about 2 blocks from the house I just sold. Amazingly, it was on the same block where the last execution of a police officer occurred about a month ago, which was finally labeled a domestic terror situation. So the first cop who was killed, supposedly that guy was a domestic terrorist, although he supposedly really did it because the cops had beat up a girl in jail, and that had been publicized on the news. So they wanted to make it seem terroristic. There are mounds all around the area. The police handled the house where the suspect was holed up exactly as they did earlier this summer when a kid was shot and killed in front of my house. They blasted the house to smithereens, etc., etc. This most recent case may sink Mike Huckabee's career, and so we can speculate that this might be a covert op to benefit Obama, because Huckabee was supposedly the only guy who could really put up a good fight against Obama in the next election. Clemens emanated from one of the Rockefellers' key fiefdoms, Arkansas, which also birthed Indrid Cold and Bill Clinton. Interestingly, Clemens was shot and killed just west of Seward Park, sacred Indian area, where they have the Virgin Mary Flatwoods monster type of sculpture that I mentioned earlier on Visit Show. There's a Morgan Street there. I've seen the name Morgan at almost every single mound site I have visited. Clemens killed 4 officers, which would be the right amount for a ritual Masonic killing. I just read in Linda Shealy's book on the Maya that they use the same word for sky, serpent, and the number 4. All the symbolisms you see associated with Buddha or Mothman. The 3-way Mayan word was Kan, or Can, which I synchronistically discussed on your show. The Mayans did their sacrifices at sacred wells, which were called cenotes, very similar to Canute. It was along Canute Creek that the Jesuit scrolls describing Egyptian tribes in Ohio were found. Shealy mentions that the Mayan glyphs were very similar to the Egyptian glyphs. In fact, it was the idea that they might be exactly the same that allowed the Mayan hieroglyphics to be deciphered. I have also discovered that the word muth, M-U-T-H, is associated with both mouth and mound, if you look up the etymology. I was in Sedona recently, Sedona, Arizona, where I noticed that the vortexes are located around Mund's Park, M-U-N-D-S. Mund is an old Germanic word relating to muth and to mounds, gateways to other dimensions. Amazingly, the Mayan word for cat, ba or baba, is exactly the same word. It's exactly the same as the word for both cat and gateway in the Middle East, i.e. Babylon. So that was what I wrote a couple of weeks ago. So, getting back to the calendar, any comments?
No, I'm with you.
On the 1st of November.
Well, I did have one.
Yeah.
It goes back to the Seattle stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Besides the paranormal possibilities, is there any reason why, I mean, unless it's a bad neighborhood, and I mean, I know you live in it, so I don't mean to, disparage where you live. But with all that activity, as far as cop killing goes, is there any other reason you can figure out why that stuff happened in that same quadrant or sector?
Well, this starting in about 2003 or 4, I can't remember exactly when I started speculating that the whole neighborhood was cursed. That because people had just, plowed down the mounds. I'm pretty sure, I know that there's 3 or 4 are still here, but, they just decimated the village here, and it's named after the most, how do you say, the Indian war chief who was the most anti-white. He was a real fighter, Leshai. And I think that, that somehow that spirit of anti-white sentiment is somehow still there and still affecting people. And I don't know how valuable it is, but I had several psychics come into my, on my street and look it over and give impressions, and they all said the same things, and they didn't know about each other's, reports. And that they were all saying that it was a highly charged area. The energy could go either way. If you didn't have an awareness of what it was, it could really cause some problems. And the neighborhood does have a real history of people fighting over really stupid issues. And all I can say is it's the worst neighborhood for the level of income level. The income level there, as I mentioned, is high. And these are expensive homes, but the attitudes were the worst I've ever seen. Just absolutely terrible. People just at each other's throats. So I do think that there's something going on there. Will we ever know? What is it? It's a chicken or egg thing, really. Did the bad juju bring in these shootings, or did the shootings just someone's plot to make the neighborhood look bad?
Well, I'm just wondering, kind of. I don't know enough about it, and I don't know. I mean, things do just happen. It's true.
Yeah.
Whether a character like that,
But you think about the whole vastness of this area. Why would, maybe he heard about the previous shooting. I don't know. Maybe he went there for that reason. It could be that, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, on the 1st of November, Gitmo detainees got their swine flu vaccines. We're sort of getting into some random things here, but these are just things that I noted. The AP reported that there was a political awakening of the Indians in Latin America, and that's always troublesome for the military. They don't want to see Indians getting all worked up in Latin America, particularly the Rockefellers, because that's their area of expertise. So when I saw that, I thought, well, there's going to be some stuff happening this week, because that's definitely something that would get the military riled up. So on the 2nd, East Berlin, the East Berlin escape tunnels were opened as tourist attractions. So they're referencing the Cold War. There's suicide bombing in Pakistan. Karzai won in Afghanistan. There was a Clinton statue unveiled in Kosovo. Ford announced a $1 billion profit. Funny how they seem to come out pretty well. Well, I guess they didn't take the bailout, did they? Democrats' health plan hits rich with tax hikes. That was one of those bogus headlines that was designed to get people riled up about the health plan. The ship built with World Trade Center steel got its 21-gun salute, the USS New York, as it arrived in New York that day. Kellogg, Brown, and Root was told that they had to cut their forces in Iraq or face fines on that day. So that, when you have a piece of bad news like that, you're going to have something happen real soon to get people off of thinking about it. And sure enough, the next day, a Cleveland serial killer, Anthony Sowell, was found to have 11 bodies in his backyard. Number 11. And it was found that he had been in the military in Japan, California, and North Carolina and South Carolina. So he was a military guy. One of those military serial killers. I don't think it's a coincidence that came out the next day. On the 4th, there was face of Jesus was found on a truck in Johnson City, Tennessee. And a cat was found to have H1N1 in Iowa. I thought that was interesting because it was a cat. We've been talking about cats a lot lately. And Iowa, of course, is where the anthrax was.
Ames, yeah, Iowa State.
Yeah, Iowa's where people are led to believe it was from when it was really from Columbus. On the 5th, we had the Fort Hood shooting. Initially, reports of 2 shooters, which were changed as time went on, as usual. And you guys talked about that with some of your other guests, Also, interestingly, a Dartmouth scientist came out on that day and said that Lee Harvey Oswald, that photo of him with the rifle was a real photo. Even though it's totally hodgepodge together, and it's obvious to anybody with any brains whatsoever. You have a Dartmouth scientist coming out. Dartmouth, by the way, is where the Moorish has a long history of supporting Moorish students. And anybody who's found any Indian, anyone who can prove that they're an Indian, can go to Dartmouth. So in a way, it's kind of a subtle way of saying Indians are dumb. You know what I mean?
Do you remember what the Dartmouth nickname was before they changed it?
No.
I believe it was the Dartmouth Indians.
Yeah.
Then, of course, like Stanford and everybody had to get rid of it. And now, the Stanford is called the Cardinal, and Dartmouth, I think, is the Green Wave. St. John's got rid of Red Men. So, anyway.
Yeah. We're still on the 5th of November. Gay partners were approved in Washington State. I could go on and on about the weirdness in Washington State with that issue, but I'll skip it. On the 6th,
well,
go ahead.
No, see, my thought about this is like, first of all, I'm heterosexual, and that seems normal. I'm sorry, but the other doesn't. But I had to laugh because I'm wondering to myself, like, who cares? Last week on the Today Show, Meredith Baxter comes out and says, after, being married to David Burney for, however long and having how many kids, I'm gay. And I'm like, why are you on the Today Show saying this? Who cares? Who freaking cares?
Yeah, it's not it's political for them, but for a lot of us, it's not really a political issue.
No, it's sexuality, and it's, I don't really want to know about it. But and of course, when I say something like this, and I've had listeners who got pissed at me because they've been trying to backdoor me, excuse the pun, about trying to, yeah. Well, look, let me just say it, okay? I'm sorry, but having a man stick his dick up my rear end does not make me, that's not a loving thing. I don't consider that a warm, loving association. I just don't. And I'm sorry, that's the way it goes. I mean, don't tell me about this stuff because it makes me want to puke. But if you all want to do it, that's fine. But why do they get the high ground? And why do you say, well, you can do what you want to do, but I mean, don't ask me to sanction or accept it or say it's okay. Then it's like, well, you're hateful. I'm not hateful. I don't want to know what the hell you do, but I just want to understand why Meredith, Baxter comes on Today's Show and they give her like 10 minutes. I mean, they give the heads of state like 3.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, it's reached a level here of where they are, there's a lot of power given to, especially lesbians in Seattle. It's sort of the lesbian mecca of the country. If you're a lesbian, Seattle's the place to go. Well, and this has sort of resulted in a lot of more rights for women here than you would find in other places. And sometimes it goes a little too far, in the sense that for some jobs you have, I mentioned this to somebody the other day, and I didn't even really think of it, but I was talking about the requirements for like being a fireman or a policeman, and they've changed those for women. They have a lower threshold for getting into some of these jobs. Well, the person I was talking to, who's a woman, said, "Well, I'm sorry, but if I have a fire at my house, I want to have people coming in who can carry me out." Yeah, exactly. If you're in a fiery place and you're laying down there prostrate, I know I am. I mean, and a woman shows up, I'm like, I'm dead. I'm dead. I mean, and even in the laws, divorce laws and things, there's some weirdness there because, I've recently been going through this. And one of the things I noticed is that they've made, let's see, how do you phrase this? They've made talking to, let's say your partner, you're getting divorced, and your partner's done, let's say you're a guy and your partner's done something reprehensible, and you're wanting to explain this to people. It's actually illegal. You can be called a domestic, you can be thrown in the clink for domestic violence simply by trying to, quote, interfere with the support for a woman who's being given by other people. And because there's such a culture here, a strong culture of women supporting each other, I mean, well, for one thing, a woman can call the police here and say that her husband has hit her, and the husband will be arrested automatically without any That's right. Without any review at all. You're going to spend the night in jail simply because this woman said something, even if there's no proof. And then an extension of this is this other thing where if you simply say something to someone else about what your spouse may have done, that can be interpreted as domestic violence, which is pretty crazy. Oh, yeah. And domestic violence should be, domestic violence. It should be physical violence, not simply trying to defend yourself, with words. But anyway. No, look, in the old policing that used to happen, if there was a call for domestic violence, and I had friends who were in the police force, they go in and they could obviously ascertain that a woman had been shook up, or something. In the old days, if it was the first call, the cops took care of it, if you catch my drift. But nowadays, you're right. If somebody just calls and says this happened, off the guy goes to jail, and it didn't even have, it could just been, vindictive by the woman. But you're right. Off you go, and now you got to try to get out of jail. I guess my point here was, the word has gotten around amongst wives in town. And the heterosexual women have become way more bold because they know, because of the work that the lesbians have done. The heterosexual women have a lot more power. And the word's gotten around about this support thing. So they immediately, when couples break up, the women immediately say, and I've heard this from other guys, if you say anything to them, they'll say, well, I'm supporting your wife. They already know that if they make the claim first, that they are the support person, that it can then be interpreted, if you say anything else to them, that you're interfering with that support and thus are committing domestic violence.
Yep.
On the 6th, getting back to the calendar, do you remember that case where there were several CIA agents who had kidnapped somebody in Italy and were on trial?
No.
They were found guilty on that day. I remember the first time when they were brought up on charges, George Bush actually flew over there. Do you remember that?
No. How long has this been going on?
It's been going on for years. But they were caught renditioning people. The CIA was renditioning Italian citizens off to some American rendition camp. The Italian government said, no, you can't do that. And Bush immediately went over and met with the Pope and tried to get it, tried to fix the case, I believe. And, well, it didn't work because they were found guilty. Also on that day, photos were posted of some sightings that occurred the day of the Mothman Festival on September 18th over the power plant near Point Pleasant. Several people saw UFOs the day that I was at the Mothman Festival. And it's called the Mountaineer Power Plant, so you can actually look that up. There's some strange orbs in the sky. There was also a videotape of some strange orbs that I don't know if they're connected with that particular power plant. But suddenly orbs flying around power plants in West Virginia became a hot topic, and I imagine some of these were doctored, at least the video footage. It looked too good to be real.
There's another name for them, too. Are they called globs or something like that? I can't remember what the jargon is for that.
I don't know, but they've been showing up in Google Map images, and they're obviously some sort of drone craft that can fly around. And all you'd have to do is, do a little photoshopping, and you could make those things fly around anything you wanted to in a video. So, I mean, today the videos just have lost all of their power.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's why photographic evidence is, I don't even know how you can admit that in a court anymore. I mean, the best was when, if you remember, and of course this was not a still, but it's back as far as Gump, when Tom Hanks was shaking hands with Kennedy. You remember that?
Yeah.
That was great. But now, how do you determine, what's real from what's not real?
On the 8th, those darn Somali pirates hit again.
The same ship? Was this the one with the same ship?
Yeah.
Only this time they got their asses shot up?
Yeah, well, supposedly they had grenades this time, and they hit an oil tanker. Just as I had predicted early on that they were eventually going to get around going after an oil tanker, because the whole goal was to raise, as this lady who wrote the book, I can't remember the name, but she was saying that it was all about raising the price of international shipping of oil would be the next tactic. And that this is, perfectly in line with that. That was the day when they announced that the shooter of the Seattle police officer was a domestic terrorist. It was also the next day was the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And 4 people were shot dead in Cleveland, Texas. Not sure if that has anything to do with anything, but I mention it anyway. On the 9th, we had Iran detaining 3 U.S. spies. NATO killed 130 Taliban. It was announced, had killed 130 Taliban in the previous week. There was a rare late storm in the Gulf of Mexico. The first iPhone worm was announced. There were, China executed 9 people over ethnic rioting. On the 10th, the DC sniper was executed at 9/11. Stocks went up. On the 11th, weirdly enough, footage of me from 5 years previous at the Mothman Festival from 2003 was broadcast according to several people in Huntington, on WSAZ-TV, which is where Matt Lauer got his start. This footage of me was broadcast amidst a bunch of Veterans Day stuff, talking about Mothman. So, I don't know. It's kind of weird.
Matt Lauer from Ohio University.
On the 12th, my son got swine flu.
Yeah, well, do you want to recount like what the reaction from the school was? You remember you sent me that email?
Yeah. Well, the school was saying, by the way, 2/3 of the kids had it. But the school was saying, everybody's got it. Unless your kid's temperature is over 103, don't even, you don't have to take them in. And because it's, there's not going to be anybody they're going to be flooded anyway, the hospitals. But this was rampant. And I heard an estimate that 20 million kids had it around that time.
You know what I mean? But nobody ever knows. Let me ask you, all right, your son had swine flu, right?
Well, I assume it was swine flu.
Well, there we go. There's another thing. Okay.
Well, we don't know for sure because they said don't bother going in.
Okay. But as far as you know, he wasn't making noises like a pig, right? I'm sorry. But, this whole thing is like they make it whatever they wanted to make it. And nobody really knows. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I went to pick him up the day before. There was only 3 kids in the class, 2 or 3 kids. And that was a combination of 2 or 3 classes.
The entire 3rd grade.
Nobody was bringing their kids to school. And on that day, George Norrie announced that the Vatican wants ET disclosure.
Oh, God, yeah.
On the 13th, the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed trial started in New York City. Water was found on the moon, supposedly.
All right, hold on. Does this make any sense to you? Hold on now, wait. Would you agree? And yeah, you kind of got to say yes, but I know. You can disagree. One of the things I go back and forth with these people in emails is that whether peak oil's real or not, it doesn't matter. Whether, any of the real circumstances that would create a situation are really there. It doesn't matter because we're going to get shorted. We're going to be put in deprivation as a method of control. But the thing that cracks me up is that we can live on a planet that's like 70 to 75% water and dehydrate. Because this is the old deal too. Well, desalination is too expensive. Why? Because you said so? No, because it actually would work. So here's my point. Desalination is too expensive. So let's go to the freaking moon and do what? Drill for water and bring it back? That should be cost effective.
Yeah, it's just another one of these outer space stories that they like to throw out every other day.
Who gives a crap if there's water on the moon?
Yeah. Also on that day, interestingly, the non-speech gene that monkeys have that keeps them from being able to talk was located. Does this mean we're going to have talking monkeys soon?
Well, why not?
Yeah.
I'm all for it. And because we had a couple in the Oval Office anyway, so.
Well, it was around this time also, like the next day, the 14th, that it was announced that U.S. planes, military planes, supposedly, had been spreading viruses in the Ukraine for 2 weeks. Have you heard that story?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah, I did.
Big plague in the Ukraine. We had a real lull the next week, or else I just wasn't paying attention. On the 18th, the Dow was up 11 points. 11? Someone told me that. Does that mean they were up? Can they be up 1,100 points? 1,111 points? Or is that too much?
Too much.
Yeah. But anyway, they said it was up 11, whatever that means. Does that mean 11.11 points? I guess that's what it means. On the 20th, we started revving up for the Senate dealing with the healthcare plan, so we had to have some more, distractions. So, on the 21st, we had Iran supposedly beginning war games to protect their nuclear facilities. There was an IRA bomb in Belfast. Are we in a time warp or what?
Mm-hmm.
There was a rare Darwin book found on someone's toilet bookshelf. The Israelis did airstrikes in the Gaza, and China had a coal mine explosion that killed 87. On the 23rd, Catholic bishops were emboldened by an anti-abortion amendment they had attached to the health care bill. The atom smasher in Geneva, Switzerland, sent protons in two different directions. This is one of those things that we've talked about before. Remember we had the planet that spun backwards?
Yeah.
And we had another one before that, which I can't recall, but it had to do with reversal. Whenever they're about to do a switch up, or they're trying to get you to think differently about some important issue, they'll have a story about, like this, where the key phrase has to do with reversal. And I'm not sure exactly what they were targeting us for when they did this story.
Talking about reversal, by the way, have you at all appreciated the fact that how they've changed getting people to get, and this goes back to the swine flu thing, I understand, but the reversal thing just, hit me. Originally, they were freaking everybody out to go get the swine flu vaccines. And I don't know how well that worked out. It seems like it didn't. And people are a little bit suspicious of it. And so the next thing they use is that, well, there's not much. You better get them while you can. In other words, create the shortage to force everybody to get it. And I still don't know how that worked out.
Shortage of what?
A shortage of swine flu vaccines.
Oh, yes. Right. Goldman Sachs had way more swine flu vaccines than the hospitals down the street. I remember that. Goldman Sachs, by the way, borrowed $13 billion last year and got straight up, loans. But
Andy, let me ask you.
28 billion in addition to that, so a total of 41 billion.
But
they run the government now, so I guess they're entitled.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that run the government. But what cracks me up is that they talk about these amounts and who they gave money to. I mean, did money really change hands? Or was this just electrons through computers? And did it really ever exist? And they're paying it back. I mean, none of us know, none of us in the street have any idea what in the world this all entails. Yeah. I mean, they throw these numbers around and it's like, oh, we gave them out. Oh, now they paid us back. It's like a shadow show. And I mean, I sit there and listen to it. I'm going, this means nothing to me. I have no idea what you're talking about. And nobody can really confirm whatever happened.
My theory is that the whole thing was about moving jobs overseas because they were able to have an excuse to cut another. How many millions of jobs did they cut in a 6-month period? Wasn't it like 3 million?
Well,
we've lost 13. How many million jobs? I wrote it down somewhere. 14 million jobs have been lost since Clinton signed the NAFTA bill in 1993.
But Andy, this has been going on since the 70s. And when it first started happening, that was palpable. I mean, even to an idiot like myself who was like 21 and, in college chasing, skirts and stuff. And I was looking at this stuff because you were impacted, at point of purchase because everything went up in prices and it was like, well, what's this about? Blah, blah, blah. And there's always excuses for it. But I mean, we've been outsourcing stuff for what? 70s, 80s, 90s. This is like the 4th decade. And this stuff doesn't come back. Maybe we got a little bit of a leg up on things because in the 80s we had the tech thing and all that, fine. But we continue to outsource stuff and it doesn't make any sense when you look at the health of a country and that it doesn't do anything anymore. It doesn't manufacture. And I'm watching all this stuff happen, like you said, and this is somewhat reminiscent not of the 70s but of the 80s in this sense. You can show a profit to Wall Street and to your stockholders because everybody, well, not everybody, it just seems that even if you're not hurting as a company or a corporation or whatever, everyone's in the kind of mode now to downsize, fire workers, streamline, whatever you want to call it, get stretch. I love these words that people use when they want to fire other people. get lean and all this other stuff. And that's great. And that makes, I guess the profit loss sheet looks good for a while. But people are out in the street and they're not working. You know what I mean? And it's like, you can only do that so long, and then you're not going to be able to play that tune anymore. And if people aren't working, you can't hide that. I mean, it's the elephant in your bedroom. So. Yeah.
Well, we're not going to get those jobs back until we're making as little as people overseas.
Yeah. Well, what was interesting too, because this is what I said in the 70s. Like, for instance, I think Levi's jeans went over to the Philippines and Converse sneakers, and I don't mean to disparage them. I think I'm remembering this right. But at least at that time, I was saying to myself, because to me it was just common sense. Why did you outsource those jobs? Well, American workers want too much money. Okay, but where else can you sell your products for that freaking amount of money that only people who make that kind of money in America can afford? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you don't want to pay the worker, but you want that kind of money for your sneaker back in the United States. Oh, yeah.
Yep.
And here we are. It continues.
Yep. The squeeze will keep on coming.
Well, that's why I'm saying that it puts people in a situation where, one, they're getting pissed. Two, nobody's hiring. And so what's the best thing to do? Go into the military. And I got to tell you this one thing, too, because I heard this last month against November. I'm listening to, on the computer, I'm listening to WCBS AM 880 in New York. And they were talking about jobs. It was like the Wall Street hour. They do it like at 9:30 to 10:30. And this bubblehead who's, I don't know, working in some employment agency, I have no idea, is talking about like, well, now that our government is our largest employer, and she was like, thought that was good. And I'm like, oh my God. If the government is your largest employer, first of all, you don't have capitalism. Second of all, you probably don't have, a constitutional republic. And how can you look at that as being okay? And it's like, no problem. Hey. Do you share my pain? I think not. Come back to the.
I'm switching phones.
I knew you were doing something. I can tell you.
I hope I don't lose you here. I'm going to turn the other one on. Here we go.
Yeah, we're working. We're ending actually our second hour, and we're talking with Andy Colvin. If you haven't noticed by now. And I play some really nice interlude music, but I don't have any. So he changes phones, and we hope that he comes back.
I have done so.
Oh, that is amazing. A seamless change. Outstanding.
And we'll be getting off here pretty soon. We don't have too much left in November to talk about.
Yeah.
I suppose we can talk about December later.
Oh, another thing that happened in November, by the way, and I don't know if you picked this out. With this global, here's another thing. Chris Matthews on Hardball. What a jerk off. Just like O'Reilly and the rest of these idiots. I'm really a tough guy. No, you're not. He's yakking with some environmental shrew who had a smile like it was like nailed in place. I mean, it was like, I looked at my wife and go, would you trust this woman? And Chris Matthews is going on about global warming, but you see, here's the thing, and here's how they changed the argument. No one's saying that we're not going through a period of global warming, however long it might last. The point is what's creating it. And so he's going around, well, can you imagine these people are saying there's no global warming? And that's when I wanted to stop the TV and grab Matthews by his ears and say, no, jerk off. It's not a question about that there isn't climate change. The question is what's creating it. But that isn't the argument. So anyway, here's where I'm going with this. They came out with an article in November about, well, what can we do to stem this? We have a couple of alternatives. And get this, one of them was maybe we should aerosol spray. And you people might have to give up your blue skies in order for this stuff to save us. And I'm laughing. I'm going to myself, I've been watching chemtrails in Florida. And I remember when I first saw them in December 2001. Now, they were doing it beforehand. I didn't see it. I was aware of it. I looked, and I couldn't see it. So I'm saying to myself, can you imagine the same assholes who tell us that those are contrails? If this program, which we know is already in the works, is okayed, they'll look at that same shit and say, oh, look, those are the chemtrails. Do you know what I mean? The same stuff being sprayed over your head that people refuse to believe is anything else except contrails from commercial jets will now say, oh, look at them. Now they're finally spraying.
And the most plausible explanations, such as all of the high solar flare activity we've had in the past few years, or HAARP. I mean, it heats up the atmosphere. That's what it does. So, those are never discussed.
And what's even better is when the glaciers chisel off and fall into the ocean, that's new fresh water. I know that gets added to the salt water, but what I'm saying is like, we can't find fresh water while it's falling off into the oceans everywhere around us. I mean, there's just so many things going on that are contradictory, and it's like, okay, so you tell me what the reality is. Fine. All right, no problem. So anyway, now they're thinking about maybe they got aerosol spray, and I'm like, well, I think you've been doing that anyway. So we'll see where this goes.
Back to the calendar, on the 23rd, those Fort Hood people were sent off to Afghanistan. They only got a couple of weeks to recover from the shooting.
Are you saying those who were wounded got shipped out?
No, though, just the people that were there when the shooting occurred.
Okay. All right, it doesn't get that bad. Okay.
Chinese drywall corrosion was in the news. They sent us all this drywall that literally makes all of the metal in your house corrode.
Well, Florida's got to be the leading state in this.
Yeah.
It's rampant down here.
Supposedly home sales surged. There was a report on that
Compared
day.
to what?
Yeah. China executed 2 over the tainted milk scandal. That'll clear up a problem.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe we should start doing that here.
Just go out and find 2 people, and that's it. And the milk problem goes away.
Oh, well, you embezzled some money? Oh, well, I know we just execute you. Maybe that would stop things. On the 24th, here's why they had that Atom Smasher story where you're supposed to think about things going in different directions in reverse. Is because on the next day, Obama, that was announced that he was going to add those 30,000 troops. So you're supposed to, change your thinking and start to realize that somehow this peacenik who won the Nobel, it's really okay if he does this. Even though it's wrong. If you're a progressive out there and if you're a typical American woman who loved Obama, and I know a lot of these, who spent a lot of time campaigning for Obama because he's handsome and he's articulate.
Oh God.
Whatever. He made millions of women go weak at the knees, right? So now he's deciding to send troops over, so everyone needs to get into their war mode.
Yeah,
and I don't think women have too much problem doing that, They're like, those Taliban, they're not treating women very well over there, and they'll often have a story when something like that happens, and there may have been one, and I just missed it. Did they have any stories about Afghan women being treated poorly around that time? Probably.
I can't tell you, but one irony, by the way, and that is before we ever went into Afghanistan. Let me rephrase that. Before we went into Iraq in 2003, there was legislation on the Hill, I kid you not, and I might even have it in my documents that I saved, because if I go into Library of Congress, LOC.gov, and they have legislation there. And I remember in 2003, before we went into Iraq, there was some kind of resolution, I'm not saying in the teeth, and maybe it was a joke or whatever, that we ought to really look at Iran for the way they treat their women. And I'm like, why are you worried about Iran when you haven't even gone into Iraq yet? So this whole bit about treating the women, I mean, obviously you understand why it kicked up a memory for me. I don't know. One other thing, Andy, and this is, the Taliban historically are religious zealots who oppose drugs to the max. But now all of a sudden, in time, the Taliban has been morphed into being the drug growers. And that is just not what fits the bill for all these years. In fact, I just got something sent to me about how they found the U.S. military involved in a drug situation, industry in Afghanistan.
No. I can't believe it.
Yeah, of course. Of course. The Taliban was anti-drug, and that's one of the reasons why they've been demonized. So now they're treating their women badly. Okay. How do they know that, by the way? They can't find the Taliban. How the fuck are they going to find their women?
Well, you're exactly right. The Taliban shut down the drugs, and then George Bush immediately, decided to go in. I think it was
and blow their asses up. Yep.
Yeah, and the drug output went back up again, and everybody was happy.
And the crew that was involved in it also, that whole, nobody knows about the Northern Alliance. Do you remember that name at all?
Yeah.
Yeah. All of a sudden they disappeared. They're the ones that were involved in it, and pinning, the drug on the Taliban. So anyway. So treating the Taliban women badly, who would know that? Probably Oprah.
Well, I know I've recently, as soon as, after Obama announced that he was sending troops, this week I saw an article talking about how things are changing for the better already. They're already trying to convince us that the Afghan women are better off. Trying to, I guess, put a nice spin on what little we've done there. In terms of what, Bush sending troops in and stuff. Trying to put a good spin on all that. So they're definitely doing those kinds of stories.
And let me ask you this. In the meantime, we still get these horrible stories coming out of Iraq. And I'm laughing as I'm saying, okay, so sooner or later we're going to be told how we have to go back into Iraq again. And let us not forget that they built the biggest military base in the world there. So do you think we're really getting out of Iraq? Probably not.
Well, yeah, I mean, I do agree with the Zimfora that Iraq's going to be the new Israel sooner or later.
How so?
Well, he's just saying that they want to create a greater Israel that's way bigger than the one that they have now.
Okay.
And that Iraq is the best choice for that for whatever reason.
I thought it would be the United States, but that's all right.
And that they're going to split Iraq into 3 sections, which is they kind of have already done.
But do you realize that goes back to World War I? Prior to World War I, Iraq was split between Germany, France, and England. Nothing ever changes. And I mean, I'm not pro-Israel. I'm not anti-Israel. I'm not pro-Muslim. I'm not pro-anti-anything. I just look back at what's taken place. And I mean, you got to admit, even from the time of the Crusades, has the West ever left the Middle East alone? I don't think so. I mean, Christmas. Just let them be, will you? Never mind.
Just thinking about time here. On the 24th, trying to get through this.
I stopped. I mean, I'm already past my bedtime, so.
It was announced on the 24th that the U.S. will not vote against getting rid of landmines. Yet again, year after year after year, we continue to vote for landmines so that kids can get their limbs blown off across the world.
Well, this wouldn't happen if Princess Di was around.
It was announced that the holidays would bring more swine flu. Governor Mark Sanford was back in the news. Donny Osmond won the Dancing with the Stars show. I don't know why I put that in there other than he's a Mormon.
Why would he go away? Why won't he go away?
His name is Osman. Very, very similar to the name that Osama bin Laden used when he was in the U.S. buying military stuff. Tim Osman.
Yep.
And then he was in the news the other day. He was back in, Obama was back, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I like that. Yeah, it's Fortean, but it was good.
Yeah. That was on just 2 days ago? Anyway.
Yeah, why haven't we seen a video of him? You know what I'm waiting for? Now Andy, have you seen those videos with him in the forefront?
Which one?
Oh, anyone you want. Pick any one.
Which
right?
fake one?
Well, all right. We agreed. And of course they would, quote, they would do this, to protect wherever he was. So you realize that's a false background. It's like, rear screen projection, right? You know what I mean? It's like a bad 40s movie.
Yeah.
What I'm waiting for them to do, and first of all, you never can hear him say anything because there's some like interpreter always speaking over him. So you never know what's really being said. But what I would like to see really is for Obama to give us a message. Obama, there I did it myself. Oh my God. Bin Laden to give us a message and have some kind of amusement park in America behind them. With a roller coaster and stuff like that. Oh, Christmas.
On the 28th, we had Dubai defaulting on $60 billion of loans. The Swiss banned mosque minarets. The Saddam channel opened in Baghdad. And the Amanda Knox trial got started, or was back in the news. On the 29th, we had the trial of a Nazi from Seven Hills, Ohio. I've talked about that Seven Hills thing before. Seattle, Rome, and Athens all have Seven Hills.
Yeah, but the Seven Hills is where? In Cincinnati?
I don't know. It's in it's near Cleveland.
All right. Okay. Well,
Seven Hills near Cleveland, where the Nazi Demjanjuk started in Munich.
You mean there's actually any Nazis alive?
There's a bunch of them still here in Seattle. There was one who was sent out not too long ago from Bellevue to stand trial. It's funny, here in Seattle, there's a lot of the Jew. There was a big Jewish, where they all left the inner city in the 70s and 80s, and they moved to an island out in Lake Washington.
So is that like a kibbutz?
Well, no, it's doctors and lawyers, and it's all very expensive. But a lot of Nazis live over there too. It's kind of weird. They sort of live in the same area. I'm not sure what that's all about. It's sort of like Schwarzenegger hobnobbing with the owners of the Limited.
These Nazis got to stop wearing lederhosen. That's how they're getting caught, I'm sure.
The 29th was also the day that the 4 officers were shot in Tacoma. There was some Iran nuke stories. They were going to supposedly be enriching uranium. Just a couple of quick things in December, just so I can get them in, so I don't have to worry about them later. Well, actually, I missed this one. This is from the 24th of November. There were 46 bodies found in the Philippines. 18 journalists had been killed. Among them are 18 journalists covering the election. It was the largest massacre of journalists ever. One pregnant woman was amongst them. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the Philippines that people don't hear about.
That's where Art Bell lives now.
Barely. I mean, it really was kind of a small article. It wasn't given much. You had to look for it to find it. Oh, that was also the day, the 24th, when the White House was crashed by that couple, the Salahis.
Yeah.
which really ate up a lot of media time, and gives Obama an excuse to be more like Dick Cheney, and have super security around him at all times.
Well, I wouldn't worry if they had come into the gala with vests loaded with ammunition and bandoleros around them.
Yeah.
Then I would have worried, but the two of
them...
it
was just a reality show thing, and they try to make it into something terrorism related.
Hey, by the way, according to the little inside joke that John Bonanno and I have about the 9 days of any story coverage, and then it passes from memory. For whatever reason, you said this to me, I guess because of the reality show. That's probably why I thought about it. And that is whatever happened to the Swiss Family Nuts in Colorado with the balloon boy that wasn't there. Does anybody know what's going on with them?
Well, they're gone. I mean, no, I don't know.
No, but you know what I'm saying? This happens and then it just disappears and you never hear another thing about it. Also, a lot about the shootings. And in November, too, there was a whole bunch of shootings, and we don't have to go back into that. But we had a couple of situations, too, that, all of a sudden, and it's people have written me in the past, and they're like, why don't you go check in about what happened? And I'm like, what am I going to do? You hear about these, mass murderers, rather, and then it just disappears, and you have no idea about resolution or what was behind it all. And that month also we had the Orlando shooter went in, he was pissed off and shot up a bunch of people at his wife's place. We had shootings in Dutchess County in New York with a hostage situation. And then somebody, the basic, guy is estranged from his wife and kills her and then shoots him. But you know what I mean, Andy? It's even if you think back, and I know I'm going far afield here, but this still bugs me. You remember the shooting in the Amish country in Pennsylvania? In nickel mines.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? A guy goes in there, and the kids all sit there while he boards everything up, and then he shoots them, and then it's like he has no history of anything. and nobody wants to go in and do an anatomy of that whole situation and why that would occur. That's the kind of stuff, and I'm sure, you know, and that's what I've been wondering about with the Seattle situation, and it can't always be that way, I know. But you got to wonder, like, who's Manchurian candidates and, you know, why this happens.
Well, interestingly, this Clemens guy, the Seattle shooter, was saying two contradictory things. He was saying he was having visions of himself as Christ, or he was saying he was Christ, and he was also saying he was the beast. Now, what is that? That is the union of Christ and Satan. And where does that come from? That is the emblem of the process church.
Really?
Exactly what the process church did. And I actually made a note about this. It says, and who did the process church get involved with? Manson, Sirhan, and Polanski. Polanski's been in the news recently because they want to put him under house arrest.
Well, they did.
Well, just let me mention this. Polanski was walking the dog of John Phillips, who's
right.
They're always making jokes about him now because he abused his daughter, and she's come out with it. What's her name? Mackenzie Phillips.
Yeah.
So he's not a good guy, probably because he was in the associated with the process church who were into that kind of thing. Well, it seems, I started to think about Polanski, and Polanski was almost killed when he was walking Phillips's dogs in the late 60s, right around the time Sirhan was visiting the process church house, which was right down the street from Polanski's. Now, when people think of the Tate murders, they don't really realize this. The process church was right down the street. And Sirhan knew them. And one of them worked in the Ambassador Hotel in the kitchen where RFK was shot. Mm-hmm. And so Polanski's walking Phillips's dogs down there. It's like he was set up, I think. Phillips said, "Oh, could you walk my dog while I'm out of town?" He walks his dogs down there, and he's almost killed by the process church's dogs, who are trained to kill. And he has to hole up in a garage until he's rescued. Well, John Judge, the researcher, he claims that Manson and knew Sirhan, and they both knew Polanski, and were involved in the process, and probably knew Phillips, who has a Cincinnati connection, as does Manson. So it kind of ends up getting you back toward Mothman country somewhat.
And that's also around the time, too, that whole Jim Jones Guyana thing also, which is another bizarre situation.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of occultism in and around Cincinnati. In fact, that area that we were looking at a while back, Mason, Ohio, is supposed to be the most active occult area in Ohio, according to someone who would know that I went to school with, who was tangentially involved in it.
But when you say
also very close to where Phillips lived.
But when you say an occult, I mean,
occult murders, occult sacrifices.
Is there anything institutional there? I mean,
this is institutional. Well, it's an up and coming. I mean, it has a long Masonic history. It has a long Republican history. It's a Republican stronghold. Kings Island is there, which has a lot of Masonic symbols going on. It's an up-and-coming industrial area, a lot of old companies with ties to the Rockefellers and so forth.
Is Mason near Ironton at all?
Near what?
Remember Ironton? Is it Ironton?
Ironton, Ohio?
Yeah.
Ironton south of there, or southeast of there on the Ohio River.
Yeah.
Pretty far.
That's a strange place, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. Well, anyway, I don't know if did I mention that I thought the Apollo money that was being given to NASA for the Apollo missions was also, I think, being siphoned off for the satellites developments, the satellite development by the Rockefellers. And it would have been easy to do because it was all happening in the same area near Columbus, and where NASA security had its office. So they could have been funneling money to Werner von Braun and those folks in Columbus, shooting it over to help put up the satellites. I think some of these Apollo missions that supposedly were going to the moon were really just shooting up satellites for the Rockefellers, and they were making us pay for it.
All right, so we're talking about this taking place during the 60s. And the R&D probably in the 50s.
Yeah, they were definitely building the Sugar Grove listening post and the AT&T dishes, which are 60 miles away. They were building all those in the late 60s, and Harriet's dad was working on them. And he was, it seems like they were trying to do a cleanup job. As soon as they got the place finished, around 68, or at least the first phase of it finished, they started, wiping out some of the engineers.
Yep. And
he just happened to, be spared, I suppose. But, they, in 67, von Braun took a trip to Antarctica where he collected, supposedly, probably, a bunch of moon rocks. Because Antarctica is a good place to find rocks that were jettisoned off of the moon during some impact and found their way here. I'm kind of on a tangent now, but they clearly were putting up satellites during Apollo. They had already put a lot of them up. They were wanting to get them all up by 68, but I don't think they did. And then of course they kept redeveloping, putting up new ones, and that's what Apollo was doing. And they were, so it was just a way for the Rockefellers to pay for their AT&T, system.
Well, I won't go off on this, although, you bring it up, and to me, this still bears a certain amount of scrutiny because I think there's something going on. And that is, with all the advances we have, with all the stuff we do technologically in space and such, we never hear much about Antarctica. And that's, somebody will say, well, that's because nothing goes on down there. And I think it's just the opposite. And, also Orwell, in his book, had a little aside when he talked about Antarctica. And to this day, I'm wondering just how much of what we see above us, and we may have spoken about this, I know I have with some folks, may be happening from below us. And I'm just wondering if Antarctica is in fact some kind of portal.
Probably, maybe, who knows?
Thanks for that.
Good question.
No, I mean, because I just, something's going on down there, and you never get the real skinny on what's happening. And what's interesting too is I got an email from somebody once who talked about, it wasn't to rescue. Do you remember the woman that was a scientist that was down there who developed cancer? And they were trying to get her out of there, and of course the conditions had to be just right. In fact, she just passed a little while ago. Do you remember that at all?
Yeah.
All right, but all right. Be that as it may, somebody sent me an article that appeared in a newspaper, and I can't remember what it was. It was mainstream, talking about the New York Air Guard being down in Antarctica. And, of course, that just, for obvious reasons, piqued his interest, and he sent it to me. It's like, what are they doing down there? And I'm thinking about Rockefeller, of course, but I mean, what is the New York Air Guard doing down there? So,
yeah.
All right. Okay. I rest my case.
I'm going to try to wrap it up here real quick.
Okay.
The ClimateGate stuff hit the news on December 2nd. The emails that were intercepted. The 3rd of December was the 25th anniversary of the Bhopal disaster, which gets us back to carbide.
Jeez, yeah.
Amanda Knox was found guilty on the 4th. On the 6th, we had a story about bin Laden. His location is still a mystery, but they think it's in Afghanistan.
Aren't we so far ahead of the game as we were back in 2001? Jeez, what a joke.
On the 7th, a spaceship for tourists was unveiled. The Pentagon ordered up 16,000 troops, so their departure was imminent at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the 10th, we had a flurry of things. We had Obama accepting his Nobel. We had that strange light in the sky above him that night. We had a story, Player Doom's team. I don't remember what it was, who he was, but I just thought it was interesting that it had a story about, a major story on Yahoo about some player dooming his team.
Do we know what he did?
I don't think it matters. Again, I'm just sort of looking at
okay.
the headlines
I got you. All right.
and seeing what kind of effect they have on people when they read all the headlines. The Tiger Woods scandal had already kicked in. There was an Iraqi security shakeup, a lot of blasts, bomb blasts going off. There was a weird article that was entitled "Killing One Owl to Save Another." It was an experiment where they're trying to kill some barred owls in Oregon in order to save the spotted owl. There was a story about a drunk who called police 47 times. There's that number 47. And so he was arrested. He was finally arrested for calling the police so much. There was a drunk Amish man who was arrested in his buggy driving on the highway asleep. His horse was driving.
And the horse didn't have a license, so I assume they both got run in, right? So.
Yeah. The House eased rules on derivative trading, which is like the wrongest thing to do. Are you kidding me? They're going to regulate them even less than they already are?
Well,
they just want to have another bubble.
Well, I thought I saw that they're supposed to, in fact, clamp down on them. But no matter what happens or what they say happens.
They're not going to.
No.
They're not going to clamp down.
You know, they're saying, well, okay, no more cash bonuses. So you give it to them in stock. They cash the stock in. What's the big freaking deal? I mean, stop.
Yeah, and that was the same day they announced no cash bonuses for Goldman Sachs.
And honestly, I have to say, if you're in capitalism and you're supposed to be laissez-faire, or, that's a joke. But the government shouldn't be doing it. That's really should be none of their business. The fact that they step in, I mean, okay, I understand why everybody's upset, but still in all, it's a Hegelian dialectic. And all it does is increase, and in this case, it certainly seems to be imaginary and not real. It may keep the masses happy for a while, but you got no business dealing with them. So, so you don't give them the cash, okay, so they take it out in stock, big deal.
Also on that day, the attorneys, Polanski's attorneys were asking to dismiss his case, because some judge originally had pulled a few tricks or something. Blackwater was linked to the CIA raids, the snatch and grab raids. There was a drone attack on Al-Qaeda. The Filipino insurgents, or whatever they are, abducted 57 hostages. And then this is an interesting one, the last one. The scientists find way to block fearful memories using, and you look at the article and they had shown people blue squares and given them shocks in addition to seeing the square. And then they wait 10 minutes. If you wait 10 minutes after someone's been shocked or traumatized, then you can go back in and show them the squares again without the shock and reprogram them to not be afraid of it. So they're figuring that if you have a 10-minute waiting period, you can reprogram people to block fearful memories. And it's interesting they use blue squares because the square, I've talked about a lot as a Masonic emblem. And the color blue is associated with Masonic history in that the goddesses were always blue. So.
Go ahead. My uncle, who's in his 90s, is a Mason. And
is he the one that was in the CIA?
No, that's the other one. That's Uncle Oli. That was in the OSS. And actually he basically was a removed cousin, but my father was orphaned and taken in by his mom and dad. So basically, they were brothers, and hence Oli was an uncle. But this is an uncle, like a real uncle, who's still alive. And I didn't really ask him too much, and I wouldn't, but just lightly in the last couple of years I asked him. And it was interesting for him to tell me, because he really doesn't seem like there's anything nefarious. I mean, but he told me he was a Blue Lodge Mason. That's the first 3 degrees. And he didn't want to go any further. And that's where he stopped. And he told me that you can choose to go Scottish Rite or York from that point on if you so choose to do so. And he said to me, do you know that so-and-so was, like a 33 degree, whatever, Scottish Rite Freemason, and I know who that person was, who's also deceased. Not also, but deceased. But he didn't seem like, there was any big deal. and I'm not making an apology, you understand, Andy, about, masonry, but here's a situation where, I've had a pretty relaxed conversation with my uncle, and he said, no, I wanted to go to, that's it, Blue Lodge, I was done. I was fine with that. So, but anyway, I just want to throw that out there. And did I ever tell you about the time I actually got caught in the main room?
Of the Masonic Lodge?
Yeah.
No.
All right, since it's this holiday season, we've gone this long. I was like 8. I don't even know how old I was. We used to go down because of my uncle. My dad and mom brought me down because, they couldn't afford babysitters. So they dragged my rear end down to what was a Masonic Lodge in Hoboken, New Jersey, which has become something else. It's like a temple or something now. I don't know. And I went down there some afternoon. I can't remember why. And I was with some young girl, my age or whatever. I can't remember why she was there either, but we were walking around. I used to set pins, in fact, some nights, when I went down there, for bowling. They had a bowling alley down below. And in the old days, there were no such thing as, the machines coming down. So I used to sit on a wall between 2 lanes, and I would when somebody, threw their second ball, I'd get in there and you would step on a pedal. So I was setting these pins, and what you do is, in the old days, at the end of the runway, if you will, the alley, you would step on a pedal, prongs would go up, and then you would set the pins, which had holes on the bottom, on the prongs, and then you would let off the pedal and they'd all be there. And that's how I did it. But anyway, I don't know how it was, but I wound up walking around the lodge with this young girl. We're both same age. And, she was kind of cute. And I mean, as much as you could like somebody at 8 years old, we really didn't process. We went walking around and we went into what would you call that? The lodge room with the black and white squared floor. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. That's on Washington's apron. That's
right.
Square floor.
Now we're up there, and I know it was kind of like an auditorium in a sense. I mean, not that there were seats all around, but there was a stage with the curtains. So, I mean, that's what it struck me like, like it was like a school auditorium without all the chairs, just the stage. And all of a sudden we heard somebody approaching. It was like a cleanup guy, and we freaked. So we ran under. There was a desk somewhere in that room, and we ran into, how like office desks have that hollow where you sit, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there's that room in there. Well, the two of us crunched ourselves. I mean, obviously we were 8 years old. And we were there, and man, we were there for a while. That guy came up and vacuumed, and we were scared crap to move. And I never said anything about it, and we didn't get detected, and I'm happy about that. But man, that was spooky. Anyway, that's my masonry story about getting caught in the high holy place. But
Well, interestingly, just to mention George Washington, he's on a quarter, and a quarter, of course, represents one of 4 elements of something. Yeah, the 4 ones, you could say.
Well, and what also, I mean, the vernacular of a square deal comes from masonry as well. And I mean, I only mention that because, I don't know if it's talking about a T square, which is actually it was an L square, which you see on the dollar bill. But again, a quarter, I think 4 corners, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. And by the way, I mean, everybody, you're aware of the symbology on the dollar bill, right?
Yeah. Well, which one?
Well,
the little owl in the corner?
No, not that, but actually right out in plain sight, and it's not really that big a deal. But if you look at the dollar on the right-hand side, there's like a little circle, and in there they have what looks like a private stripe. You know how a private stripe looks on a uniform?
Yeah.
There's that stripe, but it's an L square. You can call it a T square, whatever you want to, right? But it's a builder's square. And that's down the right-hand side. And I think a key is below it and scales are above it, balanced scales. So.
I remember when I was in Mound once filming, some lady at a hot dog stand folded a dollar up so that it looked like the Twin Towers.
Well.
Seen that.
I don't know if that was a 10 or, I don't think that was a single. I think it was a 10 or a 5. Where if you fold it a certain way, it would approximate the towers. That's really strange too. I have no idea about that.
And I've just, this doesn't really totally relate, but I just noticed that the sign of the vril, V-R-I-L, is the Tibetan, one of those early Tibetan symbols, which the Nazis and the Masons latched onto, is basically two angles stuck put together that form something like the letter C or something like the letter G in reverse.
All right.
If you break it into two pieces, you have the two angles that go together that is on all the Masonic buildings.
I want to just ask you real quick, because, I mean, there is something I want to ask you, and I let it go, and now you just reminded me. When you were talking about those lines in some kind of, like, pattern.
Yes.
All right. And I think I asked you, though you didn't hear me, and I didn't want to be any further rude than I already was. Those lines approximate, you called it what? You called it the black sun? Was that what you called it? Did that any way, shape, or form, I mean, I'm trying to figure it out in my mind what it looks like. Did that at all translate to the swastika? The reverse of the Hindu, what was that? The sun wheel or whatever it is?
The chase symbol?
Well, I tell you what, that was where I was going. That was part B.
No, it just looks like the number 11 with two little slashes in the middle, sort of in the middle of the 11s, two little angled slashes.
All right.
Which just make it look like it's an 11 that is falling somehow.
All right. Okay, well, thanks for doing that.
Interestingly, the word Illinois, the center of the Holy Mountain of Harmonics is located somewhere near Hoopstown, Illinois, I've deduced. And Illinois has the 4 ones in it. But the idea of this Holy Mountain of Harmonics, I want to clarify, because some people thought I was talking about a real mound. This is not a real mound. It's an area. It's a geographic area, and I've already named the highways you can look at and see, where it is. It forms a triangle if you're looking at it on a map. But if you think of the probably the most important Tibetan symbol is the Sri Yantra, which, oddly enough, there was once a crop circle of in Oregon, in the desert. But if you look at the Sri Yantra, you're supposed to stare at this two-dimensional shape until it becomes three-dimensional in your mind. You can kind of do it. If you stare at it long enough, it starts to become three-dimensional. And the idea is that you're creating reality out of pure thought. And I think the same thing applies to this Holy Mountain of Harmonics. It's a flat diagram that sits on the map. And then you somehow, by circumambulating it and thinking about it, meditating on it, you can generate some sort of psychic power. Go ahead.
No, now I'm going to mention this one thing and I'm going to leave it. I want to go back. I don't know if this has anything to do with what you're saying, but it's an episode I remember. And, when you're 6 years old or whatever, maybe 5, it's hard to remember anything. You don't really know if you're remembering it accurately, but this was never spoken to me. It wasn't like anybody else was around. I don't know what for whatever reason, but when I was living in West New York, which means I could not have lived there any later than June 58. So at the best, I'm 6 years old. But anyway, I don't know why, but my parents sent me up on a kind of a trundle bed in the living room. I don't know why that was. That we might have had company and I got booted out of my room. I'm thinking probably it's that. But I was laying down with my feet before our Philco TV set. That's how long ago that is, right? And then behind me, directly behind me, we had kind of like, and you've seen this in older buildings. It's kind of neat, really. You have kind of like what would you call it? 3 windows that like are truncated. In other words, it isn't a flush, straight wall, but kind of like protrudes out into, you know what I mean? You see it in some older houses. They have kind of like a turret roundness where there's rooms. But this happened to be an outcropping that had 3 windows, so it was truncated like, you know, a trapezoid or whatever you want to call it. Does that make sense at all? Do you know where I'm going? Can you vision this?
Sort of.
Well, what I'm saying is it isn't like the old plain houses, you know, where you just have a flat wall. This had a protrusion.
Okay.
An enclave, if you will. And it's, you know, it's kind of neat in all houses because a lot of them have that. Andy Sr. up in Utica has something like that. Anyway, there was a table with a lamp before the center window. All right. Now, this is like, I know this sounds really wacky. I'm not trying to reach for stuff, but it's just what you were talking about, things becoming reality out of 2-dimension. What happened that night, and I might have even been ill. I might have even had a fever. I don't know. I'm laying in bed at this trundle bed in the living room where I never sleep. And I look in the TV, which of course only has that like drab green screen because it's not on, right? But we had the blinds open in those windows. Now, it's going to sound really strange, but I would look in that TV screen at the reflection of what was behind me, and I swore the lamp was moving. Almost like somebody who was like, oh, I know how, that just sounds so bizarre, I know. And I never even mentioned this before. As if somebody was like kind of doing trunk twists, you know, so their shoulders were going back and forth. The lamp looked like it was going side to side. And I was freaking, and I would turn around, and of course it didn't move. It was just there. I looked back in the TV, it was doing the same thing. I'm not kidding you. And I never said anything about this before. I never even spoke to it about even with my existing sister. And you know what you just said? Excuse me. You know, I just wonder sometimes. I know this sounds trite, but I know I thought I'd throw that out because it was like, as if the more I stared at the blank TV screen, which was catching the light behind me with the lamp in the middle, this thing was moving. And I turn around to try to catch it, and of course it doesn't move. I don't know. It just was strange. And it you know, again, maybe I shouldn't even mention it, but I mean, that what you talked about as far as looking at something 2D or whatever and it becoming reality.
Yeah, that can happen when you're feverish.
Well, I had to throw that in there because that's a possibility. I'm not so sure I was, but I think maybe. But not to the point where I was like that under the weather where I might have been hallucinating.
Especially when you're young. When you're young,
yeah, I know.
Your mind can do that because you haven't convinced yourself of that it can't happen.
But I'll say this, I have very few memories from being 5, 6, or 7. I don't think any of us really do. But that thing stayed with me. It's trivial. I mean, to the point where I never mentioned it to my sister or anybody else, not even my wife. But it stays with me because it was like me trying to say to you now, Andy, it was like, look, I wasn't screwed up. That thing was moving. But, you know.
Well, you know, I had several of those kinds of experiences. One, it wasn't exactly like that, but it was when the lady, Mrs. Jones, told me about the schoolhouse that had burned down in the neighborhood. And I literally saw it somehow. Somehow she was telling me and I was in the right frame of mind and I could see the whole thing and feel it and hear the screams and everything. And which reminds me, I wanted to mention Sarah Jane Moore here because I'm wondering if she didn't have something to do with that. Maybe not directly, but if my theory that Charlie Manson burnt down the schoolhouse is true, perhaps Sarah Jane Moore was with him because she disappeared for 3 days in high school. And when she came back home, she wouldn't speak of at all of what had happened.
Where she had been, yeah.
And that would have been around the time, I'm thinking. That was definitely around the time when Charlie was around. Now, Sarah Jane, you had mentioned to Dave McGowan that she was not smart, you know, that she couldn't have added up like, you made a comment she couldn't add up like 3 and 1 or something to make 4 or something. And I just wanted to mention that she was actually an accountant and would have been able to do that. In fact, she was quite capable in a lot of different ways, and she was a highly intelligent kid.
Well, but doesn't that make sense? I mean, let me ask you this. I mean, do you think Manson had a high IQ, or was he just weird? I mean,
well, he was different. Those two were like the odd couple. You know, there's no real reason for them to have been hanging out other than the fact that they lived really close to each other and probably ran across each other.
But she denies that she lived there, does she not?
No, she admits that she lived there. She just doesn't talk about it. I mean, she's very good at just not talking about stuff. And this is something I wanted to mention was, since I talked to you last, I read the book about her, written by, what's her name? What's her? It's called Taking Aim at the President, the name of the book. And Sarah Jane has the history of someone who's some kind of agent, you might say. Disappearances, unexplained missing time, very, very unusual work history, you might say. She had a good job going, training as a nurse at St. Francis Hospital in Charleston, which is where I was born and where my dad died. But she decided to go into the Army for some strange reason. And then, while she was in the Army Air Corps, goes to the White House for a tour, passes out on the lawn, wakes up and claims she doesn't know who she is. But she has photos of herself in her pocket. The authorities put the photos in the newspaper, DC newspaper. The story gets out that this woman has forgotten who she is, and her parents happen to see it in the newspaper, and that's how they found her.
What year? Do you know what year this might have been?
50. What year is that?
You're pretty sure it's in the 50s.
What, 50? I think it was 52. Jeez. Or
she's not that
graduated
old.
From high school in 47.
She graduated high school 47?
It would have been, yeah, and she was in ROTC or whatever. You know, she was planning to be in the military, but then I guess dropped out and became a nurse and then went back in. And it's in the book. It's somewhere around 1950, I think, when they were doing, you know, these UFO abduction experiments in West Virginia on people that had seen UFOs. And I wonder if she wasn't one of those people, you know, who was being experimented on by the Army, especially since she joined up. It would have been very easy for them to do some mind control on her, perhaps preparing her to be an agent of some kind.
Well, I didn't catch this, but because on the Today Show, she didn't look that, I mean, she looked old, but, so she's like in her 70s now.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, she's about 80. And she'll be 80 next year.
So we're not looking like the rest of, like the Manson's posse. And I guess, who was the other one that took a pop shot or tried? Was that Fromm?
Yeah.
So she's in her 40s. I mean,
no.
if she's born in 30.
Oh, what do you mean? When Sarah Jane took the pop?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, she was in her 40s.
I mean, but it doesn't fit the bill. Like, and I'm not, I don't know how, she is not considered being part of the Manson group. Is that correct?
Right.
All right. So I'm not trying to put her into that group. But in that group, I mean, they were all younger, 20-somethings, and you can, young and dumb. But she's 40 and gets involved in this.
But she was associating with all these younger people involved in the food program for Hearst and SLA people, and she was, informing to the FBI and to Hearst himself, and God knows who else.
All right, now, in her attempt, in quotations, her attempt to kill Ford, her gun misfired. Is that correct? It just nothing happened, right?
No, it did. Her real gun had been taken away by the FBI, I think.
And what? And she was given basically it turned out to be a dud? I mean.
Right. Well, she went and bought one on the spur of the moment and drove in with it. By the way, she lived out there on the east side of Mount Diablo, where Adam and I did our recent trip. And she drove all the way into San Francisco to be involved in these different radical groups.
All right. Now, did she get off 2 rounds? Is that what happened?
She shot over his head by 6 inches. She just barely missed him because the sight was off.
Jeez.
She took a shot at him.
All right. No, because I get it mixed up. I don't know if it was from.
Squeakies didn't go off. Right. She had an antique gun.
All right. But, now, here's where I'm going, too. I mean, one of the things we, conjecture about is that if you kill Ford, you got Rockefeller as a president. And Ford, of course, was a useful tool, especially when it came to the JFK assassinations. And so he's one of their boys, but then they were going to give him up. I mean, I really wonder how that all played out. It's like Reagan getting shot, and knowing that the shooter was the son of a family that supported Bush, the old man. And it's like, okay, now what do you do with the rest of your life? Did Sarah Jane Moore make the second attempt? Do you remember if Fromms was the first or was it the other way around?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Fromms was the first, correct?
Yeah, and the guy that stopped Sarah Jane Moore, Oliver Sipple, was a gay man who didn't want to be publicized as gay, but yet Harvey Milk publicized him as gay and ruined his life for quite a while because his family didn't know Sipple's family didn't know he was gay. He ended up being embittered and drunk and, sort of died as a...
Did you say he was FBI or was he Secret Service?
No, he was a former Marine. He was just a former Marine.
Oh, he just happened to be on the scene.
Yes.
And then jumped into it.
And he ended up being very embittered by the whole thing. And it just involved Harvey Milk. I thought that was interesting. And then Milk ends up getting offed by
Danny White,
a guy who probably was programmed at Jonestown.
White, right?
Now, whether or not Jim Jones, actually, I think Jim Jones knew Sarah Jane too. I know he did because, well, I don't know, but Jones had something to do with the food program too. He was,
Well, I got an email from someone who sent some good information along, that talked about what most of the followers, in Jones' group died of, and that was basically gunshots.
Yeah, and needle marks. They all had needle marks too.
And, this individual had talked to one guy, who was involved in it, and, the individual said I was there, and those people did not die of poisoning, not with the trauma they had to their bodies. And, he said, and I don't know if it's the same source or a second one, that Jones did not die there, but got spirited out and perhaps double-crossed and executed, elsewhere in South America.
Yeah.
So, but all right, now the end of this, maybe not the end of the Sarah Jane Moore story is, as much as I paid attention to it this year when she got released, a couple emails went around between Andy Sr., myself, and Dwight the Bright or whatever. I didn't send anything; they sent it to me, and they were saying that she got released. Are you familiar with this? And she's supposedly in upstate New York at Mount Marcy.
Yeah.
Now, Mount Marcy has apparently in and around there. And by the way, Mount Marcy's like famous as far as I know as being the origin of the Hudson River. I mean, it's way up there. But there's supposed to be a facility there as well.
Is Mount Marcy next to Mount Colvin?
I don't know. I got to take a look. That's interesting. No, I don't really. I don't know. But I mean, the fact that she went up there and Mount Marcy just, rang a bell for me because that's always been associated with the Hudson River. In fact, the river starts in Lake Tier of the Clouds, which apparently is somewhere around Mount Marcy. But I mean, there's also supposed to be a psych facility there, I think. And I'm wondering if she's been put there to sit on. And of course, what is New York with the Empire State and the province of guess who? So, you got to wonder.
Well, the interesting thing about her, one is that she disappeared completely for 10 years. No one knows what she was doing. Between 1955 1956 and 1966, the year of the Mothman, right before Manson was released, she disappeared. She dropped her kids off, put them on a plane, sent them home to mom, and was not seen at all. Nobody could find her.
Do you realize she was interviewed on the Today Show?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I saw that.
She comported herself very well, I think. I mean, whatever that means. I mean,
yeah, I just get the feeling that she was a government agent of some kind.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't drop your kids off like a 9-month-old as well as a couple of other kids and just disappear for 10 years.
But then the
unless
point...
unless you've got some reason to keep your kids out of harm, or you're just plain nuts. But I don't think she was, because
but here's the point.
Some kind of plan. I mean, she married a famous Oscar-winning movie editor, and lived comfortably in Hollywood for a while.
But
she was hobnobbing with the stars, much like Charles Manson was.
But all right, now that you mentioned it, but here's the thing, and I can understand people asking this because I am. If she did this and took a fall for the company, in quotation marks, why would you want to do that and know you're going to do time? Just like Manson, unless they were perhaps Manchurian candidate.
Yeah. That's what I'm just thinking. Yeah.
That they were MK'd?
Yeah. Because she obviously has some history of that, just blanking out.
Okay.
And not speaking at all about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing to have amnesia or a couple of different times, but it's another thing to not even speak about what you were doing while you were having the missing time. I mean, unless she was just so bombed out by the MK that she didn't know where she had been. The other thing, though, I wanted to mention was she got really squirrely when they asked her during her trial, if you can call it that, whether anyone was influencing her to do what she did. She got real evasive. And apparently the author of the book who knew her for many, many years before all this, got an anonymous, or wouldn't say who told her but that Sarah Jane had been dating, at the time of the shooting, had been dating a member of Tribal Thumb, which was a San Francisco radical group. And what's it say here? What did I write down? Well, Tribal Thumb claimed to be non-revolutionary in their writings, but however, this was said by someone in Tribal Thumb to be just a ruse in order to get money. So here you have what appears to be a cover group. Now, a real revolutionary group probably wouldn't do that, but a cover group for the government would do that.
Let me ask you this time also.
Not much is known about Tribal Thumb. Go ahead.
Well, you mentioned this, and again, I mean, the 70s were a weird time, and Thorne was talking about that, and Dave McGowan and all that, and it was true. And I mean, I was very, very lucid and aware of at least what news stories were coming through, and the 70s were a really strange time. I think a lot got done, whatever that means, with perhaps MK Ultra stuff, Manchurian candidate and people, seeing what happens, running a couple of stuff, situations like Jonestown and all that other stuff. But then on the other hand, I'm wondering, and I was thinking about this the other day, I don't know why. Maybe it was after I was talking to Victor, I'm not sure. But it's like, where's Patty Hearst now? And what the hell was that about? I don't know.
Yeah, well, sure she's doing fine.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just, and again, I mean, she got off the hook because she was supposedly, she got the Stockholm syndrome, she was kidnapped, and now she believes in what they're doing. Man, that was really strange, too. I mean, actually...
Now, I just thought of this. This just popped into my head. Dave McGowan was saying that the Apollo moon landings probably were edited, if they were faked. The footage was probably edited on Lookout Mountain up Laurel Canyon, because that was a CIA editing facility.
Jeez.
And Manson was creeping around there. And I just realized Sarah Jane Moore was married to a big editor. So maybe this guy was doing some of that editing, and maybe she was involved in that as well, and was involved with Manson somehow at the same time.
And then lastly, I'm just wondering if they're sitting on her up in New York. And I'll be interested in when she passes away and what causes. Who knows? But
one thing I wanted to throw out, though, because I had forgotten to mention it, about the Bon religion being the underpinning of Masonry. The Bon religion was supposedly started by Marduk, Moloch, or Mithras. However, those are supposed to be interchangeable. So it was, they have a mythical deity that supposedly started this earth goddess religion from Iran, which might explain why we're still wanting to go after Iran. And it's reflected in, I've discussed this symbol before, this statue that you see of the Garuda carrying Jay Sangapa on top of him. And then on top of Jay Sangapa is Dorji Shugden. The Garuda, is a Marduk-like entity, and it represents the feminine earth goddess religion. On top of it, what I'm saying here is this sculpture represents the history of Tibet. On top of that is Jay Sankapa, who is known to have subdued the earth goddess in Tibet by building these stupas and poking the earth with these four corners in various quadrants. And this is reflected in the Masonic apron of George Washington and the Masonic regalia, where you have an apron, which is a feminine garment, with this four-cornered thing, which represents the patriarchy coming in and dominating the feminine religion. And Jay Sankapa supposedly lived about 800 years ago, I think. Now, this is exactly the same time when all these strange columns were built throughout Tibet that no one can explain. They're not built in squares, but you just see them all over the countryside. And I mentioned them last time that someone had done a documentary about them and that they couldn't figure them out.
Columns?
Yeah, they're these look like huge smokestacks.
All right.
With fluted sides. They're not round. They have angles, which allow them to withstand earthquakes. And I'm thinking that these were probably erected as phallic symbols.
Mm-hmm. Right.
In order to accomplish this patriarchal takeover that Buddhism was engaged in at the time. So not only, all of the religions in the last 2,000 years have gone through this metamorphosis where they place the female, feminine aspects beneath the masculine.
And by the way, I never thought about this, mainly, I guess my personification of Buddhism is all basically bald, Asian-looking people, males. You know what? I never equated Buddhism that much being kind of hot for females. Is Buddhism, is that heavily male? I mean, do you know?
Heavily male and heavily gay.
Well, of course, one goes with the other, but all right.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
And Tibet has a lot of weird sexuality going on anyway. I mean, there was a mention in one of Moon's books where the Nazis when they went over, the Nazis made great efforts to get the entire Buddhist pantheon. So they went over and bought like 108 volume sacred script collection that there are different copies of these that Buddhists spend their whole lifetimes copying. So they have multiple copies of these, histories of Buddhism.
Are you aware that there were numerous amount of Buddhists in Hitler's bunker?
Yeah, and the man with the green gloves was the key one, was the lead one, the key monk. who supposedly could communicate with Hitler telepathically. And this may be the person that Hitler was always seeing, because Hitler would be talking to his generals and then suddenly point to the corner and go, oh, he's there, and start talking to this invisible entity. And this may have been the man in the green gloves. But Karl Haushofer, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Haushofer, yep. Mm-hmm.
Was the guy going over to Tibet and doing all these different expeditions and trying to get the secret, gain the secret, because it could be, the Vikings, according to Moon, a lot of different cultures feel that they originated from that area, including the Vikings, and there's a bunch of name interchanges, similar names in the Scandinavian words as Tibet.
Well, it's not so strange to read works that cite that area. What do we call it now? The Indo-European. You know what I mean?
Central Asia.
Well, what are we talking about? No, I mean, I really never understand where this comes from. But this Aryan situation, I mean, it comes from around India. And
Aryans are named after the line of Aaron, which is one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, whether or not they're Jewish, who knows? It's way before that. So, but one of the tribes in the Bible, Aaron's line became the Aryan line.
But I mean, it's kind of widely.
And they were white, more or less, not dark-skinned.
Right. Exactly.
But they did live in India, and for a time. Although, when you start going so far back in history, you don't know where people originally were coming from. But one theory is that they came from Mongolia, and I guess the other one is Africa, and we don't know which one came first. But there was a lot of crossover.
But the use of the term Aryan that has now been associated with Nazis and white supremacists actually comes from that area.
Yes, and because the Nazis, that's why they were going to Tibet. They were trying to figure out their history
and tap into.
One of the things they noticed was the strange sexual practices of Tibetans. They have sex in public. I noticed this when I was in China, that people would just be taking dumps by the road and stuff. I mean, I didn't see anybody having sex, but
you just cop a squat on the roadside.
Yeah, they were just squatting by the road left and right in plain view.
Well, I mean, that only indicates to me they got less hang-ups than we do. But the fact that the Nazis would embrace that term Aryan, looks like they certainly, and of course with this, obviously the account of the Buddhists being found dead in Hitler's bunker. I mean, that use of Aryan by the Nazis is not so much a coincidence anymore, is it? I mean, it's like they knew where it came from, the basket of civilization, whatever you want to call it. So
yeah, and I think he mentions the name of the Rig Veda, the old ancient Hindu scripts, is very similar to a Viking script called the Rig something.
Well, and also,
I can't remember. Go ahead.
No, when Chris Knowles was on years ago, and we talked a little bit, he said, he was onto something, he was just researching or whatever, saying nobody really knows where the Normans came from. They kind of think they came from the land to the north, which of course is embodied in a lot of Nordic, Germanic, myth, and that is Thule, right? And that maybe the Normans came from there. But then when you talk about the Vikings or whatever peoples went into Europe, that they might have come out of there.
Yeah, I think it was the Rig Thule or something, one of the Viking manuscripts.
And supposedly, again, in suppressed history, if it isn't necessarily false, and that is the accounts of the Vikings going pretty much land-based down into, southern Asia, which, to me was a shocker. I mean, I hadn't heard of that before, but if they came from there, I'm wondering if they didn't try to get back to there. Because there's supposed to be all this kind of evidence that the Vikings came through that way. And of course, it's almost a funny visual, if you will, to think about it. I'm sure the guys weren't wearing hair suits and horned hats at that time, whatever, but that they would go back down there and that, there was a wider influence than we ever knew. How many peoples really went places that we're not being told about, to even include this constant questioning of whether or not Phoenicians came over here to the Western Hemisphere, where the Romans did, or Egyptians, of course, all the stuff that goes on, up the Mississippi Valley, ironically around the town of Cairo.
Well, in chapter 19 of The Black Sun, it's entitled Thule, he says the Arabic connection to the Nazis continues to reveal itself when we consider that in centuries prior to Islam, the magnificent and all-compassionate Allah was referred to as Tuwala. Because Thule is actually pronounced Tule.
Yeah, that's correct. That's absolutely.
This name reveals an undeniable correspondence to Thule, the name from which the Germans crafted the name of their secret brotherhood, the Thule Society. Thule was considered to be the capital city of Hyperborea, the land beyond the poles. Allah or Tuala showed himself or herself in many manifestations. One of these is through the ancient myth of the sun in the center of the earth, also considered a black orb or black void, which is also Garuda symbolism. It represented the archetypal powers of the universe. It is the location where the ancient elder race first interacted genetically with the indigenous race of Earth and created the amalgamated human we know today. The Thule Society concerned itself with the Teutonic lore and sacred knowledge of the elder race. The Norse myths themselves are considered to be coded sacred knowledge of this race's origins. As the first battleground between humans and gods, Ultima Thule is identified as the Teutonic Garden of Eden. It also parallels the story of Babylon, where mankind loses its connection to the Godhead. And there's also a connection to the Mayan city of Tula. So these names stretch as so many of these other names, across the globe.
And now I have to wonder also, first the construct of the state of Israel. And of course, a lot of Christians would say, I'm full of it, but it's got nothing to do with any kind of promise between Jehovah and Abraham. Or whatever. They were delivered back to their lands and they got carried away, at least 2 times, I think. So, the state of Israel is a construct by Zionists out of Great Britain, using the Great Britain government and their military to secure that area. But I'm also wondering if whether or not, with the importance that what is now Iraq and Iran have the civilization, if there really isn't something that, I don't know, our military or whatever the reason is wants to go back there and do something. I don't know, secure the area for what? But obviously Babylon apparently was out of Iraq, right? We can affix Babylon to what is now Iraq, correct? Do I have that right?
I think so.
But then you also talk about the Iranians, who are Aryans, not Arabs. And then you think about what that matters. What that means also. And now I'm wondering if, if what comes around goes around. And we're somehow messing with that. Whether Armageddon happens exactly where it's supposed to, I don't even know. That's interpretation out of Revelation, but something's going to happen in the Middle East. There's no 2 ways about it. But I think maybe we overlook the long-standing, millennial-long connection that what is now Iraq and Iran have to civilization. And if there's something, unique there that perhaps ourselves or Russia or China want to grab onto. That may sound like a stretch, I know, but it just, it strikes me that it isn't all about Israel with what's going on now. And, as it began, so might it finish in that particular area.
Well, it's all about stimulating the Messiah. Armageddon it's going to be a contrived and manufactured incident designed to give someone an opportunity to co-opt another Messiah, I would say.
Well, I think you're right.
Everybody's got their claim to this Messiah process.
Well, looking at it as far as I can understand, Revelation, and buying into Christianity, not necessarily organized religion. So let me get that straight. Yeah, that would be right. That Satan would use this to set himself up as, quote, the Messiah, which would be spurious and which would only last for such a period of time. And then he would be overthrown, according to Revelation. So I think you're right. And that whatever rises out of that, whatever entity would be seen as a Messiah type, if you will, but not necessarily. In fact, exclusively not. Jesus Christ or Jehovah, however you want to,
Yeah. Well, what will remain is the process of polarity in human consciousness versus the process of enlightenment, which is the unification of non-polarity. Those two are going to continue battling forever because of who we are.
Well, I wouldn't say forever, but again, I respect your opinion. But the polarity, that is true.
You mean until we destroy ourselves, or you think one's going to? There's going to be phases where enlightenment is more in control or more prevalent, and phases where the Dark Ages, where barbarism is more in vogue.
Well, I think we're headed for it, and other people have written to this particular theme, which is why I think that although things have been much worse in other millennia, we're returning back to something the same. They call it the new barbarians. Some authors have. And I don't think it's been a secret that the monarchs of the old world are going to try to restore a feudalism on steroids, a new feudalism. So, I have an idea that that's probably where it's going to go. And one other thing, too, and I don't know if we've talked about this. I won't go into it for the whole 9 yards, but the Rosicrucians put out some interesting stuff. I read from, the 68th Convocation, somewhere in 1913. And the person who edited that book that contains whatever it contains in that convocation is, I think, a climber, Clymer. That's a big name in Pennsylvania. It's almost a founding father name. But Clymer said in 1913, he said that when Mexico was brought back into America or the United States, then the capstone with its hovering over the truncated pyramid can finally be put in place. Now, they said this in 1913. I'm thinking North American Union, and how do they know that? But there's another book out there, which I don't even talk to you about it, Andy, called the Meniscus Chronicles. It's supposed to be fiction. But in a part of the book, it might have even been the foreword. Once again, the Rosicrucians come out with this about how the old world will make war on the United States. And the only thing that will abrogate it is a geological event that will be so much of an upheaval that the invading, marauding armies will return to their homes to see what they've got left. And I'm thinking that perhaps, I talked to the Collins brothers and they're saying, no, war won't cause the catastrophe that we see written about in Revelation. And I'm like, okay, fine. I think that's part of it. But we might also be looking at an event coincidental with this warfare that's going to be much more, obviously, murderous and deadly. And
well, we signed a treaty supposedly not too long ago, where the major nations agreed not to use environmental warfare on each other, because we do have that capability, using Tesla coils or radio waves or whatever to cause floods, earthquakes, and things. And I would see that as, it might be viewed as coincidental, but it probably would be being caused by somebody with a technology, a HARP technology or something.
Yeah, and my question is, and again, I'm thinking about Revelation because this all ceases. And as you know, the account goes that Christ will return and there'll be a millennia of peace after the fact when he throws into the bottom of this pit Satan, I guess the false prophet also, whatever it is. So, there's going to be destruction. One of the things I'm wondering about, and I don't mean to get on into this, but whether or not for that 1,000 years after things have really been decimated, a certain percentage of the land is gone, a certain percentage of the waters, if not all of them, are poisoned, what kind of sun gets through over whatever might encompass us, whether it's the result of a nuclear thermal blanket that what's-his-face talked about, Sagan, whether or not the earth gets healed so that people can actually live here for another millennium. So it's extremely interesting, which is kind of a bad choice of words because of what it really entails, the disaster of it all. So, I don't know, but I think we were on the, and I hear people rap the thing about Christianity. You may feel the same way, and that's okay, about how it's fear-based and all this other stuff. Well, maybe organized religion is, and I pretty much would agree with it. But I also think there comes a time, Andy, when things just, things must happen. Things come to an end. Nobody thinks it's going to happen during their time on Earth, but it's going to happen. And I'm wondering if we're not drawing closer to a very big event, perhaps the likes of which no one has ever seen. I kind of think it's going to happen. I don't want it to. I'm not really, happy about it. But as I said to you earlier in the show, which has now lasted 12 hours,
this is the longest show ever.
You keep setting records, but yeah. What, are you kidding me? It's 3 hours, 24 minutes. Whoa, jeez. Without commercial breaks, imagine that. Well, one maybe. So are we looking at this? I happen to believe that it's drawing closer. I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow or next year or 10 years from now, but I think we're reaching the end of something, and that has to happen. Nobody wants it in their lifetime. I understand it, but it has to be, and if you're here, hey, that's a luck of the draw. As I may have said to you also, too, can you imagine being, a Jewish kid in Poland, born in 1930? Man, what a nice life you must have had. You know what I mean? You're put in that situation at that time. You can't ask why. It just is. So, I'm sure that a lot of people didn't think that would happen to him either. But I think we're on the beginning of something. And when I was talking to Victor the other day, he thinks we're in deep sneakers next year. I don't know. But I just wonder, and this goes back to what we talked about, whether or not our injection of 30,000 troops, if that means something. And you were saying, well, only for the building, the securing of the pipeline. And it could be. But I just wondering if people will look back at this time and say, okay, this kind of, was a triggering event.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's why it's so important that we get these talks transcribed and into paper form, so that when people have to go down into the caves to escape the radiation, they'll still have these books, and they will have us telling the story of what happened. and then the Grassy Knoll, or
whatever I call it now,
whatever we're calling it, will become a Bible of sorts for future generations.
Well, you remember Fahrenheit 451, and I'm wondering if there wasn't a reason for that. Again, Bradbury, very interesting book he would write. As prophetic and ominous, I think, is probably what Orwell wrote, or Huxley, that the oral tradition would have to last for a while because the idea was to let's what we would call burn all the books. So you're right. Maybe I don't know.
Because the audio tapes certainly won't be able to be played.
Yeah. Yeah. So all right.
Speaking of which, I've got an outro song chosen here. I'm thinking the Marcella Bennett song, Marcella versus Mothman. Marcella was a Mothman, probably our most famous Mothman witness, who died this year. And so I'm thinking it would be appropriate to send you that song and have you play it. All
right, and I'll tack that on to the end of the show as I usually do, with fronts and backs flanking each live recording. So, anything else before we all fall asleep?
That's it.
Amazing. And I apologize to people too, because I know you're not 100%, neither am I. And of course, as the hours grow later here, we're looking at 1:45 a.m. Eastern. It's kind of hard to not make very strange noises. Trying to clear.
Yeah, we're both sick, so.
Yeah. All right. Well, listen. Thanks for coming on, man. That was wow. And we're going to do it again. And lastly, I want to ask you. You did read Robert Denton's email about his last trip out to West Virginia?
Yeah, and I wanted to say, he mentioned staying at the Marriott where he was giving a talk, and that is right where the Elk goes into the canal, where Magic Island is, and where that bridge collapsed years in 1904. And so that's a spooky little corner. And I think he said he had some really strange dreams while he was there in that hotel. I've actually stayed at that hotel too, by the way.
Yeah, and he said he actually had a couple of weird physical occurrences as well with the mask and such. And the thing is, he said he's willing to come on after the first. We said we would wait until after, quote, the holiday season passed, and to get you in on it as well. Because obviously he was heavily impacted by whatever happened out there, and he's willing to share it. And I don't think that you find that at all, being necessarily as extraordinary.
Yeah, he mentioned driving up from the hotel on Washington Street all the way to Woodward Drive, turning up Woodward Drive. Now, what he probably didn't know was that when he made that turn, because he said he saw people and they looked sick. Well, that's right where I took my Geiger counter was going off. So that location, and that's literally, 100 feet from where Charles Manson grew up. That whole area there is polluted with radiation somehow, some way. And then he drove up past Sarah Jane's Moore's house, and he described getting to the top of the hill where he got a really super creepy feeling. And he saw these 3 houses or whatever, and guess what? That was my house. One of those is my house.
Oh. Was he aware of that, by the way?
He didn't know that.
He didn't know at all.
No, but he literally described it in his email. He said he got totally weirded out at the crest of the hill, and that's where I lived. At
this date, and it's still relatively recent that he sent that email, did you write back to him that was in fact the case?
Well, my computer's been
That's
down.
Right. Okay.
So I didn't get to write him back.
Well, I'll tell you what, that'll be a wild show. Not that should be unusual, but he was very emphatic that what went on there was extremely palpable. And of course he sent that email to you as well. And I don't know. I don't know about ley lines and whatever that's supposed to be about or what goes on below the earth, but do you believe in ley lines? I mean, that there's some kind of power conduit going through certain areas?
Well, it makes sense. Any kind of body that's got an energy force running it is going to be putting off a signature, a radio wave signature, and it's going to be coming up in some geometric form out of the center of it, especially if it's a sphere with a power source. It's going to have you're going to have your Van Allen belts out in space around it, and then you're going to come in closer and closer to the surface, and then you're going to have various geometric patterns of energy coming out. So it makes sense.
Well, for the next time, and we'll probably talk a little bit in preparation for this, but I'm wondering what goes on below us. And as you just said, in a way, to summarize it, as it is above, it is as it is below.
Well, that con word actually is embedded in words that have to do with that very concept. The concept of a sacred pool that's connecting earth energies below the surface to ones above the surface. And in fact, Denton was talking about that, ridges that have caverns in them where you have a greater distance from top to bottom, create more power, more energy. But it's that connection, and the con word is one of the ways you can say that and build it into words that connote, that sort of connection.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean,
that sort of connection. I keep using cons in my description of it.
Well, I mean, it's true. I mean, con, coming from the Latin, I assume, the prefix means with. And we were just saying, linking
Yes.
Right. Okay. All right, then. I'll tell you what, unless you got something else, we'll call it a day. And if that is the case, I look forward to you coming back, if you're all right with that, with Denton, to share what he has to say about his last trip out there.
Sounds great.
All right, listen, thanks for the time. It was good to talk to you, Andrew. Have a safe holiday season. And you get better, I'll get better. We'll all get better. And I'll see you on the other side of the first of the year.
Merry Christmas.
Happy Xmas. All right. Bye-bye.
He's curious about what I'll do next. Since attention is focused on me. I remember when I greeted him in a French maid's costume.
On my coat, my mother will be angry with me.
something that even teachers can't give you. A great big curiosity. You know what curiosity is. He wanted to know what made things work. Why horses could pull more than they could carry. Why the sun came up in the morning. He wanted to know the reason for everything. So this meant that he had to learn how to read, because books had most of the answers.
And passes close the throb and hunger for my depths. The center of the universe is my pulsating and maddening desire.
And this was small, and he found it in a hurry, because he was anxious to begin his life's work. Yes, when Tom, his real name was Thomas Edison, when Tom was still a boy,
I use my newfound skills for this basic oral technique. I gently press the man to lie on his back.
as you read, you will learn many new and exciting things. For books are filled with the wonders of the world. Books are filled with the beauties of the world. Books are filled with the music of the world. In books you will find the people of your dreams, the places of your dreams, and the songs of your dreams. As you think of your wish to dream upon, just say to yourself, I want to find the magic. I want to open the door of my mind to see what God has given me. I will start my search when I awake, and every moment of the day.